meeting with a study session, and we have welcome everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Before we call the meeting to order, I'd like to call the meeting to order at 5:30 and have an announcement to make. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with State of California Executive Order N-29-20, dated March 17, 2020. All members of the City Council are participating in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting live may do so at mountainview.registrar.com, on YouTube at mountainview.gov/YouTube, and on Comcast Channel 26. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments during the public comment period for an item by signing up at mountainview.gov/cc_speakers. Any emails and voicemail messages received by 5 p.m. today were forwarded to the City Council. Emails received after 5 p.m. and prior to the close of the public comment period for the agenda item will be read into the record by the City Clerk, and any voicemail messages received will be played by the City Clerk. Now, I'd like to ask the City Clerk to proceed with roll call.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Hicks.
Here.
Councilmember Matichak.
Here.
Councilmember McAllister. I believe he'll be joining us in just a moment. He was having some difficulty getting on. Councilmember Ramirez.
Here.
Vice Mayor Kamei.
Here.
Mayor Avikota.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will start our study session, item 3.1, the Bayshore Circulation and Feasibility Study. And I have as our presenter, Project Manager Jim Lightbody. Is that correct? Welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Let me put the slides up. So thank you. We have a brief presentation and then anxious to hear your comments and thoughts on this project. The purpose of the study session this evening is to give you an update and review on the North Bayshore Circulation and Feasibility Study, which has been underway for about the past year. And it's a project that came out of the North Bayshore Precise Plan from 2017, which included the identification of 2 follow-up elements related to transportation. The first being further look at circulation plans and strategies that would be needed to support the full Precise Plan build-out. And we've been doing some modeling and development work on that, and would expect to bring you more information on that element later in the year. The other element, which is the subject primarily of the discussion today with you, is to explore the feasibility of some potential gateway improvements that were identified in the Precise Plan, and for further evaluation and direction. And those included a potential bridge across Stevens Creek and a connection under 101 Charleston Road, and we'll talk about each of those further briefly. So this is a map just kind of showing those 2 areas. We have 2 options for the Stevens Creek Bridge and then the improvement at Rengstorff. Focusing first on the potential gateway improvements at Stevens Creek, the concept was a transit and pedestrian bike bridge that would have separate or combined components for those. At the council's request, we've looked at 2 locations, Charleston and La Bonita. Charleston was identified specifically in the Precise Plan, but the council asked us to also look at bridge options in the vicinity of La Bonita. And for each of those, we explored 3 different alternatives, and I'll shift to the particular graphics on those. The first alternative, and I just put the figures for Charleston, but they were similar for La Bonita. The first alternative was to build 2 separate bridges, a higher level transit bridge that would be available for transit vehicles, and a lower level head bike bridge that would connect to the Stevens Creek Trail and cross over at the levee level separately. So there would be two bridges for that option. The second option would be to try to avoid impacts in the creek in terms of piers and creek impacts. This concept would develop a high-level clear span bridge, which would cross over the creek without any intrusion into the creek. The trade-off with this bridge, two options. One is that it would require a structure extending above arch or cable connected structural bridge that would extend above the bridge deck itself. It would also provide a less direct connection to the Stevens Creek Trail. And then the third option is a lower level bridge that would combine bikes, peds, and transit and would cross over around the level of the levees themselves. That reduces some of the cost of having separate bridges, but adds a complication by having the trail users having to cross the transit bridge at grade in order to allow it to be at the lower level. So we looked at those three options and developed, talked to stakeholders like the Water District and NASA and so forth to understand their issues. I want to emphasize that this evaluation was a very preliminary one just to try to assess the feasibility of these options and to provide some input to you in terms of what direction we should go in terms of going forward. Our recommendations for the Stevens Creek Bridge are that we should focus in particular on the Charleston options and not consider the La Bonita options. And the reason for that is that we think that Charleston really is the best connection to the Charleston transit corridor that's being developed. It would have the most benefits. A transit bridge would have the most benefits to the transit corridor. Plus, at Charleston, there is no direct connection to the Stevens Creek Trail, whereas there is already one at La Bonita. And so we think this would add some value to overall bicycle circulation by focusing on Charleston, as opposed to La Bonita, which we don't think has as much benefit in terms of transit usage. And we also looked at the three options in general, and at this point we tend to prefer the separate transit and head bike bridges, but we understand that there are many issues that still need to be worked through. As I said, this is still a fairly early evaluation stage, and there would be a substantial additional environmental work and other planning work that would need to be done going forward. Turning then to the other gateway option, which was over at Rengstorff, the concept in the precise plan was to envision a connection that would go from Charleston on the west side over to Landings on the east side via a tunnel that would cross under 101. And we looked at this in some detail, and there's information in your council report. We looked at it in some detail to see how this would be in terms of feasibility. And our conclusion was that while it is a very expensive project, it also doesn't really accomplish the objectives we had expected in the concept that was included in the precise plan, which is that there would be convenient access from the 101 and Rengstorff interchange into this undercrossing to allow additional commuters to have a different alternative access into North Bayshore. The grades and the depth of the structure, as we've looked at it in detail, don't really allow for those connections and would most likely require additional right-of-way along Charleston in the vicinity of the Costco and would complicate the connections that are planned for the Landings project. So our recommendation is to not further pursue this option. Instead, we explored an alternative ramp improvement, which I'll show you here, that is significantly lower in cost and we think accomplishes many of the same potential benefits from transportation standpoint, realigning the ramps on the Rengstorff 101 interchange. Right now, there's a ramp that the northbound ramp that connects into Charleston, into Rengstorff, and has there's some significant conflicts where the traffic merges, which causes backup both on 101 and on Rengstorff. Instead, this alternative would route that ramp onto a new intersection, signalized intersection on Rengstorff, and eliminate that merging problem. It would also allow for a new connection directly to the Landings Frontage Road and Landings Drive, allowing an alternative access into North Bayshore instead of the current plan, which requires all traffic to go up to Charleston and conflict potentially with transit vehicles that are going to heavily use Charleston. The other benefit to this reconfiguration is it would significantly help bike and pedestrian usage on Rengstorff by eliminating the high-speed ramp conflicts that are problems with bicycle usage. Instead, all those movements would be controlled at this intersection and would be safer for peds and bikes. So our recommendation on that element of the work we've done is that we discontinue further development of the Charleston undercrossing and instead focus further evaluation of the Rengstorff ramp realignment project as a potential priority transportation project, recognizing that this is very early. There's only been limited conceptual development, and much more planning and work with Caltrans and BTA would be needed to develop that project. So it would be, a number of years in the future before that could be completed. Next steps then on the traffic evaluation, transportation strategy, we expect to continue to develop additional scenarios and test those out, including the potential long-term impacts with travel behavior that might be associated with COVID as a result of telecommuting work and so forth. So that'll all be part of additional scenarios that we plan to test over the next few months and probably come back to you in the fall. In the meantime, based on direction we get from you today, we can complete the feasibility study and overall assessment of the infrastructure evaluations as we discussed, particularly in regard to any further development of the Statons Creek Bridge options. And then finally, we would continue to coordinate with BTA and Caltrans on the US 101 Rengstorff ramp realignment project, which is planned as an element of BTA studies that are going forward. So the questions we have for you, basically, do you support the recommendations to focus on the Charleston alignment? What do you think of the alternatives that we have suggested in terms of the Charleston Bridge alternatives? And do you support dropping the Charleston undercrossing and focusing on the Rengstorff ramp alignment? So with that, I think Don was going to pick it up at this point.
Thank you, Jim. So as Jim noted, staff has presented 3 questions to Council in the study session report. However, staff has come to recognize that these are wide-ranging, major topics that probably cannot all be answered in a 1-hour study session. What would be most beneficial for staff to focus our study effort is for Council to provide direction for questions 1 and 3. Namely, is there support for us to focus on Charleston as the potential location for a transit bridge and drop law of Bonita from further study as a transit bridge? And number 3, is there support to drop further study of the Charleston undercrossing of 101 and focus instead on further evaluation of the Rengstorff ramp realignment? As for question 2 about a preferred Charleston Bridge configuration alternative, we've concluded that it is premature to ask you to provide this kind of direction tonight. We've heard a lot of questions from council members and in public comments about the bridge configuration. In addition, we realize that this question deserves more extensive outreach and community input before bringing it to council. Rather than answering question 2, staff recommends that council provide general comments about a Charleston Bridge reconfiguration
and tell us what additional information you need in order to discuss this at a future council meeting. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Since this is a study session, we will take public comment in the beginning, and if any member of the public on the line would like to provide comment, if you're in the attendee box, please click the raise hand button at the bottom, or if you're on your phone, press *9. The city clerk will display the timer on the screen, and I see 3 hands up. So we'll start with Ida Dev. Welcome. Let's see. There you go. You should be on. Is that okay?
Thank you, Mayor Abakogi and members of the council. My name is Gita Dev, and I am with the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. The circulation study is yet another step in our looking at North Bayshore. One of the first things that occurs to us is that given the post-COVID era, we are not sure that we, in fact, will have as serious a traffic problem as we have been thinking that we would, and therefore we would suggest that it may be beneficial to postpone some of these decisions about major infrastructure issues until a later date. We do feel that the most important areas are crossing over 101 from Mountain View, so that very direct connection into North Bayshore, like Rengstorff. So we are supportive of the Rengstorff modifications. When looking at it, however, I have to tell you that for a pedestrian or a bicyclist to cross 6 lanes of traffic coming off a freeway or off the bridge, it's pretty daunting. So I would recommend that we do look once again at Google's idea of putting a bridge from Leghorn over to Landings to increase the capacity for active transportation, which we find that a lot of people are in fact now much more interested in now that physical distancing is an issue for them. The other issue that we'd like to raise is we are not, and we have not been, very supportive of a bridge over Stevens Creek for 2 reasons. One is environmental. Any amount of traffic, whether it's transit buses or automobile traffic, which I'm sure will happen when we are all gone, will provide a constant stream of toxic brake dust and toxic tire dust onto the creek below. It's just inevitable. Along with that, the lights and the noise will just make it not very habitat friendly. So we think that it's really important to keep creeks as habitat areas, and crossing at Charleston fragments the creek from, it's already fragmented at 101, and then it goes all the way to the bay. This would break it into a couple of pieces. And lastly, we really feel that North Bayshore and Mountain View should be very aware of the fact that Sunnyvale's Moffett Park is going to be an enormous high-density development, as will NASA in the future. Therefore, you're opening the North Bayshore up to traffic which will be cutting through North Bayshore, which doesn't even belong there, if you want Charleston to go all the way to the light rail. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go on to Alex Brown.
Thank you. As a member of the North Bayshore community, I appreciate staff exploring further outreach before making large decisions about the area. I use Stevens Creek Trail and go up and down Charleston and Shorebird all the time. The bridge at Charleston, I think, would conflict with the proposed eco-gem from Google's Shorebird plan in that neighborhood. And I think that more exploration about how this is going to interfere with or work with the different development proposed by the various developers is warranted. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Chris Chambers. Welcome. Unmute you. Trying to unmute you. There you go.
All right, great, thank you. Cliff Chambers, resident of Mountain View, and I'm representing the Mountain View Coalition for Sustainable Planning. We sent in a detailed letter, but I'd just like to summarize the key points. MVCSP is really in concurrence with the staff direction and recommendations for the Stephen Creek Bridge. We think that the Charleston is the way to go, and the separated bike ped and transit vehicles is also the way to go. We do have some concerns. First is, if there is going to be a second bike ped crossing at La Avenida, which does make sense from a transportation network standpoint, there really needs to be a full vetting of the potential environmental impacts of having two separate bridges in different locations. And from I understand from the staff responses to the council questions, that analysis hasn't been completed. Second concern is that there's key user groups that should have been included as stakeholders, and I gave several examples in the letter, but for example, the Friends of Stephen Creek Trail had no idea this was going on, and they should have been there. And I also feel that the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee should have had input as part of this meeting before it was brought to council. I have shared sentiments expressed earlier about some of the massive investment in road capacity, potentially at the Rengstorff interchange, before we understand how long-range travel patterns might or might not change post-academic. I think one of the key questions is whether TDM measures, for example, 15 to 30% telecommuting during the peak periods, could really solve some of the peak period congestion problems. Certainly as a predominant landowner, Google really does have the authority for scheduling meetings and work schedules to make some of this happen. So we'd also like to see congestion pricing study ahead of any decision for expanding road capacity at Rengstorff. In other words, really look at some of the demand options. And then finally, there really does need to be incorporation of Moffett Boulevard into the circulation study. In the long range, it's quite likely that the Moffett Gate will go away, and there's opportunities for increased pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure and should be included in future iterations of this study for North Bay circulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other members in the attendee box wishing to speak? If not, City Clerk, do we have other members of the public commenting?
Thanks, Mayor. No, I do not have anyone else signed up to speak, and I did not receive any emails after 5 p.m. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So then I will close public comment and bring this back to council for questions. For staff on the project. Let's see here. Any council members with questions? I don't see any. So then we can go on to, oh, I'm sorry. I see now Councilmember Manischek.
Thank you. Sorry, my box disappeared on me. I couldn't find it. I do have a couple of questions. I appreciate all the modeling that was done. And one of the questions I have, I want to understand if we have modeled a complete build-out of North Bayshore. I think I saw that was a next step. But I'm struggling to see what percent of the vehicle or bicycle capacity do these alternatives provide? Like, how much closer does that get to 100% of what we need, assuming an SOV of 35%? Do we know that?
We don't. We're planning to do more work. That's part of the next phase of the study, is to look at the build-out of North Bayshore and test out several different scenarios. Obviously, with what's going on now, we'll have to explore some different ideas or additional ideas, such as the level of telecommuting and so forth. So the intent is to test out a variety of different scenarios, working with Google and the other property owners in North Bayshore to see what the different possibilities are to support the full build-out. And that's the work to be done over the next few months for review with you in the fall.
So the direction we provide tonight, that would be like the one scenario for these items that you would look at versus any other scenario?
That's still to be determined. I think that providing more clarity on the infrastructure pieces will help us to define those scenarios, but we may test out some certain scenarios with and without the additional infrastructure improvements.
Okay. Do we know the current volume of vehicles, transit, and passenger cars, I guess I would say, going in and out of North Bayshore, like the total number? I was trying to find that in the reports we have, and I couldn't find that online.
It would be part of the annual monitoring or semi-annual monitoring work that's done for North Bayshore, which includes vehicles of all types and PEDs and bikes and all that. So that's done on a twice-a-year basis.
So I was looking at that, and I saw the peak hour and the peak period. And then there were some tables at close to the end. So I didn't get to look through the whole thing. Are those tables that show, I believe it is, by hour, I would sum those to get the total? Or maybe it's summed, and I just didn't see that.
I think it's summed in the report, but there is the tables in the back do have a lot more detail about individual modes and sections. For example, travel, bicyclists using the Stevens Creek Trail or the Preliminary Creek Trail, that type of thing is all in there.
Okay. On attachment 1, well, actually, maybe given the additional information that Dawn provided, maybe I don't need to get into that. So if we do go forward with a bridge and the changes at Rengstorff, that would impact the number of gateways, so to speak, that we monitor, because it would add one over the creek. So would we then add that to our monitoring and consider that in the capacity?
I would think we would need to do that, yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember McAllister?
Yeah, this bridge behind me has lasted a long time, so I don't know if we have to go make something work. So just put that in your remember. So, I still have a concern about questions about the Google bridge. So if it's okay for Google to put a bridge at La Avenida, but it's not okay for the city of Mountain View to put a bridge over there for connecting. So if we're trying to minimize a footprint, why wouldn't we allow Google to put a transit bridge and their what they call the bridge to one bridge, but they cover it all? Wouldn't that minimize the footprint and minimize the environmental impact down at La Avenida?
If I understand your question, I think our recommendation is that we don't think it makes sense to put a transit bridge at La Avenida because it doesn't really connect very well with the Charleston Transit Corridor and has more limited transit benefits. So that's probably the primary reason why we think pursuing a bridge at Charleston would make sense.
Okay, but you're building it principally for Google transportation system since you said corridor. How many current Google buses come in and out of, let's say, Shoreline?
I'm not positive what it is currently. They have given us some estimates over, what they expect in the next couple of years, and it's on the order of about 100 buses covering both directions in each hour during the peak period.
So is one of the goals of putting Charleston is to increase capacity for Google to run their shuttles between Sunnyvale and Mountain View?
Well, it would help with that, but it also would help relieve some of the impacts on Shoreline by shifting those buses across Stevens Creek and over into the NASA area where they could then connect over into Sunnyvale. Yes.
Can we going a step further and thinking what options or alternatives to, instead of having those buses running, that we would have some other daytime transportation system going? Instead of having buses, we would come up with something a little more sustainable, environmentally superior.
We haven't, as part of this current study, we haven't looked at that in detail, but as you recall, the previous automated guideway transit study, we did look at the concept of some kind of autonomous transit that could use dedicated lanes. So the Charleston Bridge would be compatible with that vision if we were to pursue that.
But okay. So I know, it's not one of the questions today, but I'm still having a concern is that we're building. Well, that's a comment. So, what would require? How much of the Google Bridge at Ravanita, they need clearance from the Water District and City of Mountain View to do this? And have they got a preliminary okay from staff to move forward with this particular project?
I think I'll answer that question. Google is still exploring the option of potentially they would design and construct a bike ped bridge just south of Avenida. This is in relation to a couple things. One is their desire to provide an improved bike connection to Sunnyvale via Manila Drive, where they're also looking at putting in bike improvements, as well as their interest in being the leaser for the Orion Park U.S. Army site. And if that were to come to fruition, then they could design through that site a bike path that could be used by the public as well as for their own uses to connect to this bike ped bridge, which would then connect to the Stevens Creek Trail on the west side and allow bicycles to continue up and connect into La Avenida. So it is still just preliminarily being discussed. They will need approval from the Water District. They will need permits from the city. And we will be bringing it forward to council for discussion once Google is in a place where they really want it seriously considered and some kind of approval from the city.
So I think there was a question. I still have a question about the Huff area parking garage for landings. Is there any talk of trying to put in some kind of transit mode that would reduce the need to have that large parking garage at Huff, instead of put it more on the outskirts of North Bayshore instead of the heart of North Bayshore? I mean, there's all kinds of options out there. Are these all going to be considered along the line?
Well, when it comes to talking about the landings development, that is coming to you in June for approval and entitlements, and there'll be a lot more information provided about both the development on landings and the proposed Huff garage. And as part of that, there could be discussions about the transportation impacts and what this means to have a garage. Right now, for the North Bayshore Circulation and Feasibility Study, in doing our scenarios, we work with what's already been approved projects, what's in the pipeline, which is mainly the landings development is moving forward, and what potentially could be the rest of the build-out of North Bayshore based upon the North Bayshore precise plan.
Okay. And one question on some of your models that you have, did you do different percentage of telecommuting that would negate doing any of these circulation models? So did you do a 5%, 10%, 20% that might negate some of the need to do the transportation improvements?
We intend to do that. We have not yet done that. Obviously, this has all happened fairly quickly, so that would be part of the next phase of the work, where we would look at different scenarios related to the needs for transportation with the build-out of a precise plan.
Could you just so there seems to be a lot of, we're going to study parallel or comparable or compatible projects. So could you sort of walk me through your thought process of how you came up with this Bayshore circulation program, a feasibility study, and then the next step, and the next step, and the next step? Or what was prior to this, and how do you put them all in a line to say, okay, when you're done, this will give us a real good comprehensive plan?
The study that we've been working on is really a fallout or direction from the precise plan that was adopted in 2017, which specifically identified the need to do feasibility studies of the Stevens Creek Bridge, the Charleston Undercrossing, and related improvements. And so these were included in the precise plan as candidates for additional gateway infrastructure improvements. And so the purpose of the study was to follow up on that and evaluate the feasibility of those improvements and see if they should be carried forward for additional development. So that's what we've been focusing on up till now.
So we're not looking at a big picture, we're looking at specific projects that were mentioned that we don't know if they would be fully integrated into a comprehensive study.
That's what the next step would be.
Oh,
Which is why we've asked to focus on those two questions, so that it could help inform as we do the next set of scenarios. Do we assume there's a Charleston Undercrossing of 101? If not, that just takes a big piece out, and then we look at, can we assume that maybe there could be some modifications to the Rengstorff ramp? And also the location of a potential transit bridge, using Charleston, for instance, which can connect directly into the Charleston Transit Corridor. We feed that into running these next set of scenarios. And then a new factor that's come into play that we've learned with COVID-19 and so on is we knew that we were going to have to test different TDM strategies. So it was going to take more than this infrastructure to work with the traffic demand and have good traffic circulation and active transportation in the area. And so now a much bigger factor in running the next set of scenarios will be assuming a much higher rate of telecommuting than we have seen in the past. And we can see what benefits that provides.
So my last question is, in the environmental impact report, talking about bridges, should we have looked at that? Or does that give us a guiding line of what type of bridge or location of the bridge? Or was that discussed in the EIR? So was any bridges discussed, and if they weren't, should that have done that homework first before we decide on these other bridges, potential bridges?
As far as I know, the environmental document didn't specifically include the Stevens Creek bridges in the assessment of the environmental document. It was merely identifying the precise plan as needing further evaluation and study, which is what we've been doing.
So is that going concurrently, the environmental studies of bridges across Stevens Creek, along with this?
That would be a future phase of the work. If we were to go forward with the project, then there would be full environmental analysis at some point.
It's a bit of an iterative process. We need to know environmentally. So we've got multiple alternatives and multiple locations here. If we can narrow that down for the environmental study, then the environmental study then informs what the impacts of selected alternative or alternatives are, and that may in turn affect the design. So it's kind of a step-by-step process. What we're trying to do here is narrow it down to something that can be studied. I mean, it's a big process to to study a project environmentally like this, and if we can narrow it down to a smaller number of alternatives, that'll help with the process.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, I have Councilmember Hicks and then Vice Mayor.
I have one short question, which is in the previous session when we studied we talked about shoreline and the reversible lane. One of the comments I remember being brought up was that there are not a tremendous number of buses using shoreline at this point, but that we expected more in the future. So I'm wondering about sort of the possibility for distributing buses. It makes me question the imminent need if we have the reversible bus lane to channel a lot of buses on. What's the need, or when would the need come into play for an additional transit bus with the Charleston alignment? Like, how do those different access points, at what point do they become necessary? Or maybe they're not with the reversible bus lane bill.
Well, the bus lane, the shoreline transit lane, really serves a slightly different transit market that's primarily designed to serve vehicles connecting with the downtown transit center, so connections to Caltrain and getting people into North Bayshore. And so the MV-GO services, which would hopefully grow in the future, would use that lane. Also, there's DTA has a route through there and so forth. The extension across Stevens Creek would be more to serve the commuter buses, longer distance commuter buses, and inter-campus connecting service that mostly operated by Google, but not exclusively Google at this time.
So would it be mostly to connect the development in Sunnyvale and Nassau? Or, is that a very large part of the expected use?
Yes, I think that would be a big part of it.
Okay.
There's also a fair number of buses, most are Google, but there are other companies out there such as Intuit that run buses that are bringing in employees from other areas, not along the Caltrain corridor, and they end up on 101, and there is the possibility that then they would exit 101 Moffett Boulevard instead of Shoreline, for instance, and it would be, again, a way to move some of that bus traffic off of Shoreline Boulevard. So those are the various things. And to answer your questions about timing, it's always a situation that by the time you know you need it, it's too late, because these transportation projects take at least 7 to 10 years to get through your design, environmental, funding, and construction process. So there is something to be said for at least your long-range plans to show what you plan for your overall system to look like, even if you say, we're not going to pursue it right now. But is it part of our plan in the future? Because that can affect future land use decisions and other decisions about the transportation network. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Singer, and then Councilman Ramirez.
Great, thank you so much, Mayor. I just wanted to follow up on the Moffett Boulevard that's been brought up both in public comment and in our discussion right now. I think, I'm just curious, it's not considered one of our gateways into North Bayshore. But kind of given the discussion going on now, has there been any thought about including Moffett Boulevard? Which we will have. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just we have included Moffett and the NASA development potential in our traffic model. So as we do further scenarios, we will get information about the impacts on Moffett as well as the rest of the North Bayshore.
Okay, so would we include that as a potential gateway, or is that just a consideration we're taking in, or could staff maybe elaborate on that? Because One of the things that I think high level council needs to consider is the amount of projects going on in that area. And I know 3 development projects are being constructed or occupied, and we have 8 more in the pipeline. Given what's happening on the NASA property, as well as what's going to be happening on the Army property, I'd just like a little bit more information on if we'll be including Moffett, and at what point do we need to start considering that, particularly when we're talking about the potential for bridges into that area.
Yeah, as I said, we have included their development plans in our model. From a transportation standpoint, we're primarily looking at the impacts in terms of transit, ped, and bike travel, not assuming that the additional general vehicle access through that. But that would tell us more about the impacts on Moffett as part of the modeling work.
I think when that is brought back to council and we do have further discussion about the Charleston Bridge and the results of the impacts on Moffett, I think that's probably a better time to decide, do we treat it as a gateway like the other 3, or do we not? I think that's probably a better time to have that discussion when we have a little more information.
Great, thank you. Mr. Ramirez?
Thank you, Mayor. Just one question. First, thanks to staff for responding to the questions I submitted before the meeting. The responses, I think, were very helpful. But just to follow up on one, staff sort of provides some comments on programmatic solutions to address traffic demand. So, if, for instance, I'm interested in looking at congestion pricing and maybe paid parking as TDM solutions. And I think the written responses mention some of the operational benefits of the Rengstorff interchange improvements in particular. But to what extent could we address a lot of these, or the anticipated traffic demand using congestion pricing and other programmatic solutions rather than through, potentially very costly capital improvements?
Well, that's certainly something we do intend to explore as part of the next phase, and we would look at a range of strategies, including higher levels of TDM and potentially the benefits of congestion pricing. That's been identified in the precise plan, and is always, has been a consideration as something that could be pursued in the future.
Just to be clear, Jim, though, that isn't part. Congestion pricing study isn't part of the current scope of the North Bayshore transportation study.
No, it's not not the details of how you would do congestion pricing. What would be is, perhaps some assumptions about higher levels of TDM that would provide benefits, and then how we would achieve those could be, congestion pricing could be one element of that approach.
And so just for my benefit, is that something that, would it be helpful for the council to provide direction on incorporating some of those programmatic solutions, or are you likely to investigate them anyway in your analysis as maybe alternatives to the capital improvements, or where do we need to provide input on those kinds of ideas?
I think we'd appreciate any input you can provide. We've got some general ideas, but we haven't developed anything, in specifics yet.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other questions from council members? I just had a couple. I asked this question by email, and I just wanted to confirm it. My question was the distance of the span from the Moffett side to the Mountain View side across the Stevens Creek. And is it 600 feet or meters or yards?
I think what we provided to you is 400 feet across the creek channel itself, and then potentially another 200 to span the PG&E easement to the west of the creek.
Okay, so that's one at a time down the track. And then my question the other question is,
I asked for the list of priority improvements in transportation improvements in North Bayshore. If we chose to not move forward with either or both of these projects, would we have an opportunity to look through the list and move up other projects? Or also talk about congestion pricing and paid parking and other TDM measures?
So, if you look at that list, what it says for both the Charleston Bridge and what was the Charleston Undercrossing of 101, it was just to do a feasibility study.
Yes.
So the list did not include funding for either of these projects, did not include actually saying we're going to pursue and build these projects. Therefore, choosing not to pursue either of these projects doesn't necessarily mean that you would move forward or advance the other projects, because the other projects were listed as projects that we are going to do. They are priority transportation improvement.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the purpose of listing to do a feasibility study was to determine, is it possible to do it, and do we want to add these projects? And then,
so they have not been added. This was the opportunity to decide whether to add them or not.
That's correct.
Got it.
And in terms of the programmatic approaches and other ways to address the potential traffic demand and gateway capacity, as Jen mentioned, we're going to be running several more scenarios, and one of them would be, I think we were already talking about this, that, we would run it with, for instance, the Rengstorff realignment, but we would also run a scenario without it, with full build-out of North Bayshore Precise Plan and these enhanced TDM programs, and see if we can lower the SOV mode share through these programs enough, and we'll play them off against each other in the next set of scenarios.
If I recall correctly, I don't know if I do, when we talked about the Sobrato project, I thought there was we required the project to pay for a congestion pricing study. Is that right? Is my memory correct? I'm getting older.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if they occupy before the Women's Space Park realignment and the Shoreline 101 off-ramp, then they were on the hook to pay for a congestion pricing study.
Do you have a sense of what the timing is right now on that project?
The shutdown has not helped the schedule on the Shoreline 101. I don't know what it's done to Sobrato's schedule, but it may be more likely that the off-ramp is delayed a little bit more and that they would have to pay for that study.
Okay, great. Thank you. If there are no other questions, I would like to go to the council questions. And I was making an assumption, the second question about Charleston Undercrossing might be quicker. So could I take a straw vote? Could I see a show of hands for council members who support staff recommendation to drop the undercrossing and substitute it for the ramp realignment project? Show of hands. You can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so great. Any comments on this item? No? Oh, Councilmember Manichak, yes.
So I think with all of these, for me, it's kind of hard to give direction on pieces of the picture in North Bayshore when I don't really know, kind of what the end game will look like. So while, I think it's okay to look at this, what's sort of unsettling for me is the fact that this is coming out through this project rather than the assessment of landing and the Huff Garage. So, I feel like we need to look carefully at the big picture and not piecemeal. And I'm very concerned that by saying, yes, let's look at this, it's just one piece of the big picture. And so I guess, I feel like it's okay to look at it, but I'm not sure it's going to be the ultimate solution that we move forward with. So I feel like I want to sort of reserve the right to say, no, actually, that's not a good idea. My biggest concern about this one is, when we did the precise plan, we talked about one bridge out in North Bayshore, and tonight we are talking about 3 bridges over the 2 different creeks, and that is very concerning to me. So, this is a bridge. I'm glad that it's close to 101, but I think we need to be incredibly thoughtful about that bridge if we move forward with it, and I really do want to understand the environmental impacts of it. Thanks.
So maybe I could ask council members, is there another question here? Should we be discussing whether to put this on the list now or wait till further information? Councilmember Ramirez?
Thank you. So, sorry, I may have gotten a little lost here. So, we're not commenting on the Rengstorff interchange, right? So, Councilmember Matichak, were you talking about purely the crossings over Stevens Creek, or did your comments also relate to the Rengstorff interchange improvements?
Well, I was talking about, tonight we're talking about 3 different bridges. And one of those is part of the question I believe the mayor asked, whether we support it or not, right?
Yes, so
the Charleston undercross and instead look at improvements to Rengstorff. Yes, because that requires a bridge.
So, okay, you're speaking all of the projects.
So we're going to take just the Rengstorff piece first, and then talk about the Stevens Creek crossing separately.
If I may just clarify that, when you give us direction to say, okay, to drop the undercrossing and continue, all you're saying is we can continue to study the ramp realignment. You're not committing to saying we're adding that as a priority transportation improvement at this stage or to us pursuing it, but that when we run these next set of scenarios, the ramp realignment will be one of the things that we consider in running the scenarios, but we are not going to run scenarios that have this big undercrossing at Charleston under 101, which the staff analysis is that really is not feasible to build, and so we really shouldn't study it further.
So when you say you would further study it, would you study it in the context of, for instance, the Landings project or other development projects coming online in that area?
Yes.
Okay. Does that work for you, Councilmember Matichak, and your concerns? I'm sorry about jumping around, but I just want to kind of close the loop on these points.
I understand what staff is saying. I guess my struggle is, and I'm sorry, I can't separate these all out because I think they're all related. So I think it's okay to drop the Charleston undercrossing, but my concern about the other option is, or the other project we would look at on Rengstorff, is that it requires a bridge, and the fact that we didn't talk about this the first time we talked about the Landings project and the Huff Garage to say, oh my gosh, we need to do something different in terms of circulation, because that configuration with the amount of parking that is at Landings and the amount that is required at Huff to park Landings has a huge impact on circulation. And so that's why I'm struggling sort of to say it's okay to separate these out, because really this is one big picture out there.
Okay, good point. Fair enough. I'm just going to then open it up for comments on both. Then I think we did answer the question about dropping the undercrossing. So now we're talking about the ramp, and then if you want to discuss the bridge or bridges over Stevens Creek Trail, why don't we open that up then? Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, so I guess moving on from 3 and back to question 1 about the staff recommendation to focus on just the Charleston alignment and not pursue the La Avenida alignment. I think, staff and Mr. Lightbody's analysis of this is, I generally agree with. I think if there's going to be, possibly a bike and ped connection at La Avenida, that may ultimately that would ultimately come to us at some point. But I think that makes I would be more okay with that than I would at having the actual the transit bridge at La Avenida, because I think, as staff pointed out, it just makes more sense for it to connect in with the sort of proposed transportation network at Charleston. So I think in terms of studying a transit connection or a transit bridge that's only open to transit vehicles, and that we would have 100% control over the types of vehicles that would be able to cross it and the number that could cross it. I think that's the alignment that makes the most sense. I think, and I think ultimately as staff pointed out, like we're talking about a 7 to 10 year time horizon, and I think it will be important for us to at least have done some environmental study of this to determine whether or not it makes sense. I know there are a lot of concerns around that, and I think it's worth doing at least the analysis at this stage to know what may or may not work. I think my preference would be that we not have basically an at-grade crossing where, as some pointed out, you may have some conflict between the folks on the Stevens Creek Trail and those trying to cross over from one section to the other. And the other thing I was going to say is, from a 7 to 10 year time horizon, I don't think it is. I don't think it's feasible to expect all of the whether they're electric, autonomous, something or other, buses, whatever transit vehicles happen to be crossing or needing to get between the projects over at Moffett and in the North Bayshore. I don't think it's feasible to put those on 101, and that's really the only other option that they have right now and would have in perpetuity if we don't at least study whether an alignment is possible there and do the environmental analysis. So that's a very long way of saying I support staff recommendation number 1 that we just focused on the Charleston alignment for the transit bridge and just with and not the La Avenida alignment, and then just with my preference would be that we avoid any conflicts between those on the trail today. Just that we not have an at-grade crossing, basically, that would create conflicts.
Thank you. Anyone else? I don't see any other hands up. Councilmember Ramirez?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess the only, concerns I have are, I think it sounds like the programmatic solutions are going to be explored more fully later on, and I think where possible, I do have a preference for a lower cost solution over a higher cost one. And I think congestion pricing and paid parking will be particularly effective. I think the one thing that would be helpful is a better understanding of the operational improvements that we can get from some of these capital improvements, as was described in the written responses. I think that's where I would appreciate maybe a better understanding at least. And so the Rengstorff improvements, I felt the staff made a good case for further exploration in those written responses. And maybe doing something analogous for the Stevens Creek crossings would be helpful as well. I think the point that staff made about sort of the time frame we're looking at is important. I don't have any sense at all. I think the other challenge I'm having is we really don't know what the long-term implications of the pandemic and the economic crisis will have on transportation demand in this area. And so it all feels very speculative at this point. But because we're working on such a long time horizon, I do think it makes sense to do some further exploration. And so I'm comfortable with the staff recommendations just so we can get all of the information we may need in the event. These are important capital improvements to implement. Having that information on hand would be beneficial. And we won't really know until who knows how many years down the road. But I would feel more comfortable having them available than finding out too late that we really do have to go and do the environmental review. So I guess long-winded way of saying, comfortable with the staff recommendations, but I think, if we're able to find lower-cost solutions and find other ways of addressing operational impacts, then those would be higher priority in my list. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands yet, so I'll go ahead and comment, and then, I'm sorry, Councilman McAllister, you just stood on me for a second.
Oh, that's fine.
Go ahead.
Mayor, you remember in 2014 when we were discussing Stevens Creek Trail and putting a bridge up there. So I got a couple of thoughts, and I do sort of have a quandary of this is not one project, but we're looking at, there's a lot to go into this. But I'm concerned that there's also the part of the aesthetics of putting multiple bridges on Stevens Creek, the environmental impact of putting the bridges on Stevens Creek. And so I haven't seen anything to change my mind about not pursuing La Bonita. I'm concerned is that we're looking at building a transportation system now for the present and buses, but not looking for something down in the future where we aren't building a transit system for Google. And I say Google, I mean, others may be using it. But the perception is that everything that we're doing is building a transportation system so they can move their personnel from one side to the other using the current technology. And I'd rather see us look at something that gets those 1,000 buses off the streets, even if it's an aerial guideway or something. And that's where I'm sort of looking more at. Maybe we look at the whole design of, instead of having the Charleston transit corridor, maybe if we're looking at things and we're digging at and we're saying, well, we're not building for now, we're going to build for the future, that we would reconsider other options. And concerning the bridge in Charleston, as I say, I don't want to have a bridge and then, it's supposed to be nature. You're supposed to be able to be out in the environment and sort of relax and let your mind go. And if you're on the trail, all of a sudden you see one bridge. You go down a little further, you see another bridge. And I'd rather consolidate the bridges as much as possible next to the freeway because you've got the noise, congestion. And as you go further out on the trail, you want the peace and serenity. And so I can't support something at Charleston at that point. So I know there's other components that come along, as Councilmember Matichek was pointing out, that there is a lot going on here, but I'd rather do environmental impact. I'd rather see the bridge at La Bonita. I'd rather see us try to figure out a transportation solution using La Bonita, because then we'd have one bridge that would cover everything and still maintain the environmental integrity of Stevens Creek and the beauty of it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Matichek?
If you want to go first, that's okay, because I've spoken before.
Oh, okay, thank you. So yes, I wanted to add my comments. We go back to 2014 in this discussion, and Councilmember McAllister, I remember very strongly that you wanted to see a bridge. If we were going to do a bridge, do it at La Bonita. I personally have been opposed to a bridge crossing over the Stevens Creek for quite some time because, quite frankly, I question the necessity of it. As mentioned, it's 600 feet from one side to the other, and so a bike ped bridge I am completely supportive of. I guess I'm a little concerned about the process and Google studying, the Lagomita crossing that was not brought to us first or as part of this our transportation priority list. And also knowing that we were interested in looking at a Lagomita crossing. So, but, it is what it is, and I could support that if it's a bike ped bridge. But we talk about a transit bridge. The reality right now is that there's not a lot of transit other than the frankly, mostly Google shuttles. And, my interest right now is to try to lower the SOV. We have not reached our 45% cap. We're still at 55%. But as many have mentioned with telecommuting, my hope is that we could get there. We have a new tool that's been proven through the sheltering in place. And the other benefit of the sheltering is that we see more people out and about walking and biking, and a lot of that has to do with just not having car traffic. And so whether it's buses or single occupancy vehicles, having less of those, my hope is that it encourages other active transportation. And so I just don't see the necessity, especially given the price tag of, I think it was $69 million or so, almost $70 million, to do a transit bridge that really connects one side of the creek to the other. And also that, we don't know what will happen in the future, but I suspect that if, traffic congestion goes up again, we'll get pressured to allow that to be open to single occupancy vehicles as well. And that's really not the purpose. My interest here is that we, improve other infrastructure so we get other modes of transportation. With e-bikes and e-scooters, there's so many more options now, and I would be fine to look at a bridge that includes those options, but I just don't see the necessity for a transit bridge that allows buses or shuttles to come across. So I would be interested in just putting a pause on this project. I see, and I understand it's not on the list yet, but given the workload of staff and the many other projects we have on the list, and there's a lot of bike ped projects, I'd be much more interested in moving forward. If we can, save that capacity to move to work on the other projects more quickly, that's really my interest at this time. I appreciate Councilmember Ramirez's comments. Way back in 2014, or maybe before that, I remember very few people, I think I was the only one who was interested in congestion pricing because that was such a crazy idea. But it seems like it's becoming more and more of interest, and the paid parking issue too. I think we can really look at, how do we lower SOV rates? Those are two tools that we could definitely look at using. So I would much prefer that rather than spending the $70 million on this project. Thanks. We'll go to Councilmember Matichak next.
Thank you. Again, I want to make sure we're looking at the complete picture in North Bayshore and understanding how the different projects impact overall volume of traffic and the FOV rate. So I still believe that what we said in the North Bayshore Precise Plan is what we should be following, and that was that we would consider one bridge over Stevens Creek. And so, as others have said, it's a little bit discouraging to hear that a bridge has been in the works and we're just now hearing about it. I don't think there should be a bridge done separately from something the city is doing. And I am okay with a bike ped bridge, but that should be something, the city takes the lead on. If others want to help fund it, that's great. And if they want it at La Avenida, that's fine with me. I am concerned about a transit bridge, because as has even been mentioned here tonight, I guess it seems like the vision is that a transit bridge would be a parallel path to 101, that all of the private shuttles then could avoid 101 and drive in North Bayshore from, Mountain View, Sunnyvale through Moffett Field. And I guess I'm not interested in providing an alternative to 101 that goes throughout North Bayshore. I prefer to figure out how to reduce the volume of vehicles that go in and out of North Bayshore. And my colleagues have mentioned a number of other projects that are out there that maybe we look at first before we look at building a transit bridge. My biggest concern is the impact on the environment. And as I said earlier, when we were talking about 3 bridges, that is so much more than we ever considered in the North Bayshore Precise Plan. I find it sort of astounding that we're talking about that. So a bike ped bridge close to La Avenida, I think is fine, but I'd like to look at other things before we look at a transit bridge. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Vice Mayor Kamei? Great. Thank you, Mayor. So I think I'll just kind of frame the lens that I'm viewing this before I make some of my comments. I think it was helpful to hear where Councilmember Matichak was coming from in her 30,000-foot view, so I'm going to try to do the same, which is for myself when I was reading the staff report. I think the thing that stuck out to me was that we have 2 of the 3 gateways that are almost completely at capacity, and that our SOV rate percentage for 55% is actually increasing since last year, not decreasing towards the 45% SOV target rate. And so when I was reviewing the 3 questions from staff, everything I'm looking at is trying to figure out how we can do a mode shift away from vehicular traffic and to new vehicles that it actually encompasses shuttles as well. And how are we creating a bike ped network that is robust and a better alternative. So, I heard some of the comments related to the Rengstorff ramp realignment. I think kind of given where we are right now, it makes sense to study, so I was comfortable in that when the straw poll came forward. I think in terms of questions number 1 and 2, for myself, I think it was a little bit of a chicken and egg. So staff has said to us, well, it's an iterative process, and we need feedback first before we can look into some of the questions. But for me, I feel like to be able to provide the direction that staff seeks, as mentioned, having robust public outreach, engaging with our community groups, taking into account our environmental ecosystem, looking at the programmatic elements and changes that could be made first before multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects are things that I feel like I'd like to pursue first. While the realignment is something that I am supporting, I think when it comes to the bridge alternatives, my preference would be bike and pedestrian as well. I think that one of the things I'm looking for, and we talked about it, I think, last week or the week before, are a better circulation and better networks, particularly if it's 600 feet over the creek, which will have less environmental impacts. And I would assume, too, that perhaps it wouldn't be as much of a fiscal impact on us. I think another consideration is I know that we're going to hear back in a couple months how the climate will be related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think many companies and organizations are thinking about what their workforce future is looking like. And before we put forward very, very costly infrastructure projects, I would love to hear a little bit more about where our business community is. Are they going to move more to telework? So that's kind of where I am right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hicks?
So I wanted to start off by thanking staff for beginning the presentation, particularly Don Cameron for beginning the presentation with rethinking stakeholders, because I did, as many people did, get a lot of feedback from a wide variety of stakeholders, from environmental groups, community groups, bike ped groups, trail groups, that they would like to be a part of the process from early on, and that they believe that kind of that the decisions like this are a part of the so-called design process that they need to be a part of. So I'm hoping we can make that a sort of more standard thing that we do, and thank you so much for starting off that way. And I'm glad we heard from several of them tonight, although certainly not all of them that I wanted to hear from. Then the second thing, I agree with the general direction that Council is taking. I would like to look at more demand management, and I think that the pandemic has given us an opportunity. I mean, it's not a great opportunity, but in some ways an opportunity to rethink things, particularly telecommuting, changing peak periods, some other things that are not related to the pandemic, but the paid parking. I have heard more and more use of even electric bike loans being used in some cities during the pandemic. So just some really more robust approaches to our demand management. In terms of and then the other thing that the pandemic has brought up for me is that the kind of recreation that people are participating in now is walking, biking, hiking a lot, and that was always a predominant form of recreation, and the Stevens Creek Trail, I think, has always been very important to us, but at least with my experience in talking to people, it's more important than ever. So I want to so the Stevens Creek Trail is really, in some ways, it's our only linear park, and I just want to make sure that we retain it as the gem that it is. So I'm very sensitive to the environmental impacts of multiple crossings. I'd like to encourage, I think I brought this up one of the previous meetings, I'm fine with bike bridges over the trail, even at multiple points. I would like to encourage some of the newer, sleeker steel bridges over concrete that I see used increasingly, that I think, although I'm certainly not an expert and I would like people to look into it, but I think they have somewhat less of an environmental impact and they're also less expensive. So possibly we could do, more of those and fewer concrete bridges. And then I would be willing to put a pause on the exploration, to look at some of the more robust demand management and put a pause on the, even if a temporary pause, on the Charleston Bridge at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, I just wanted to share one thought that came up a few years ago, and just sort of given where the council is headed on one of the benefits of having I think when we think transit bridge, a lot of what comes into our heads are like giant Google buses. 7 years from now, as they look today, going over the creek. And I think one of the things, at least that I'd envisioned, was more of a unique, not just space for bikes and peds, but also those you need at some point a way for those who aren't as able-bodied to cross into the area. And so, maybe you just don't allow really large buses. Maybe what you create is, a smaller, mostly bike and pedestrian path, but also space for, smaller, electric or vehicles that, that folks who can't necessarily ride a bike or walk long distances very well have the ability to use whatever form of transportation that looks like in the future. And so I think one of the benefits of having this crossing at Charleston, even if my thought there was not that the city would spend $60-something million on this, but we identify, okay, here is another tool in our toolbox where, as we do, if we end up in a full build-out scenario, we have things that we can require of developers to mitigate these things. And one thing that we can require is a bike head bridge, and maybe one of the crossings, whether it's Charleston or La Avenida or whatever it happens to be, has some extra space for some whatever innovative transportation technologies that may arise in the future for people who can't necessarily ride a bike or walk. And so that I just want to try and pull us away from thinking about 7 years from now giant gas-powered buses crossing this thing, when I think really what will end up happening is something much different, and it would be a corridor that we would fully control. So anyway, that and maybe we study something that looks different, or people just prefer not to study it at all. I would hate to not have that as an option of us to require of someone in the future. And I think if we, that's just not a tool. But the reason it's identified in the precise plan is it's a tool in a larger build-out scenario that we can utilize for our benefit, not something that we're just going to go build ourselves and spend $60 million on. That would never anyway, I'll stop there over time.
So I wanted to respond to that. I agree. And I said this before, if we want to look at a bike ped bridge, but maybe make it wider for the e-scooters, e-bikes, and I kind of joked about this before, but I'm half serious. The golf carts that we used to ride during the parade, something like that for those who live, the pregnant folks or the folks who can't walk the 1/10 of a mile is understandable. But my understanding with the transit bridge was, there is a weight load that it has to carry if it's going to be for vehicles, and that's a concern for me. Is the environment, as others have said, it's the environmental impact of this pretty big bridge, and so I just don't feel that at this point in time that's a necessity. And it's become less of a necessity, I would say, now than before. So I would like for us to focus on, and my thought was, if we decide not to move forward with this study, could we then potentially look at moving forward the other TDM options and studying those? Maybe we'll get the study from Sabato or not, but I would like for us to move forward in looking at those options instead. If that's the trade-off, could that be the trade-off?
Yeah, could I sum up, Ben? And I think I can answer your question. What I'm hearing is support for studying the Rengstorff ramp realignment alternative in lieu of a Charleston undercrossing of 101. And I also seem to have a majority for not continuing to study a transit bridge over Stevens Creek at either location. And so I think, that'll be the input into the future modeling we do. Part of that modeling, as Jim said, will be, some investigation of TDM and how much do we need to drive down vehicle trips and what is the impact of not having a bridge over Stevens Creek. And so I don't think we'll answer all the questions with the current study. Like we said, there isn't a detailed congestion pricing study here, but I think what we can bring back to you is the transportation impacts of the infrastructure decisions from tonight, some information about TDM, and some thoughts about further study.
Could you...
I'm sorry?
Could you not last piece? You cut out. We didn't hear the last piece of your...
Oh, I'm sorry. I heard myself. What we have tonight is some the decisions about the infrastructure we're going to study, and so we will do that. There will be the Rengstorff realignment, but no transit bridge. We will be able to bring back some information about TDM, and then probably some recommendations for further detailed study of items such as congestion pricing and so on. That isn't all in the current study.
Great. I believe that was a good summary. Thank you very much. Anything else on this item? If not, we will close the study session and move on to our regular session. So, switch gears here. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with State of California Executive Order N-2920, dated March 17, 2020. All members of the City Council are participating in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting live may do so at mountainview.registrar.com, on YouTube at mountainview.gov/YouTube, and on Comcast Channel 26. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments during the public comment period for an item by signing up at mountainview.gov/cc_speakers. Any emails and voicemail messages received by 5 p.m. today were forwarded to the City Council. Emails received after 5 p.m. and prior to the close of the public comment period for the agenda item will be read into the record by the City Clerk, and any voicemail messages received will be played by the City Clerk. All votes will be taken by roll call vote. Now, I'd like to ask the City Clerk to proceed with roll call, please.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Hicks.
Here.
Councilmember Matichek.
Here.
Councilmember McAllister.
Right here.
Councilmember Ramirez.
Here.
Vice Mayor Kamei.
Here.
Mayor Abikoga.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. All members are present. We go on to item 3, and we have no presentations. We ask Mr. Fuller to stay on after the study session, as our first presentation is for him. This is a sad day for many of us in the city, though probably a happy day for Mr. Fuller, as we congratulate him for his long years of service to the city of Mountain View and on his retirement. And this is long, but I think it is important to read. So I would like to read the proclamation in his honor. Whereas Michael A. Fuller began his engineering career as a junior assistant engineer with the West Valley Sanitation District in 1988, became a land development engineer with the city of Campbell in 1992, and was hired as an associate civil engineer in May 1994 by the city of Mountain View. And whereas Mike was promoted to senior civil engineer in May 1999, capital projects engineer in September 2002, assistant public works director in August 2007, and public works director in May 2010. And whereas as a new engineer in Mountain View, Mike participated in a wide variety of activities, including reviewing plans for private development and capital improvement projects, developing the city's capital improvement plans and budgets, and planning improvements to the city's water, stormwater, sewer, and roadway infrastructure. And whereas as an experienced engineer, Mike solidified his reputation for being responsive and professional while working on numerous development and and infrastructure projects, including CEQA analyses, successful closure and landscaping of the Crittenden, Vista, and 544-acre site landfills, Evelyn Avenue improvements and reconstruction, Miramonte Reservoir expansion design, the Senior Center master plan, and numerous water, sewer, stormwater main replacements. And whereas after Mike transitioned to a leadership role, he managed numerous capital projects, including completion of the shoreline maintenance facility, the Senior Center, the Child Care Center, extensive improvements to the Stevens Creek Trail, and the complex and challenging construction of a reservoir and potable water well at Graham Middle School. And whereas as Public Works Director, Mike oversaw the successful completion and implementation of major city initiatives, including the city's first pedestrian master plan, sea level rise studies, the landfill master plan, additional improvements to the Stevens Creek Trail, ADA upgrades to the city's pools, construction of the teen center and shoreline athletic fields, the transit center master plan, the McKelvey Park detention basin, shoreline boulevard transit improvements, a water transfer to the city of East Palo Alto, an expanded water quality program, and completion of the community center. And whereas Mike is recognized by peers and colleagues for his calm and collaborative demeanor, positive and can-do attitude, ability to concurrently track and manage an immense portfolio of projects, and his skill to act strategically while considering short and long-term needs and goals. And whereas Mike is recognized by peers and colleagues as a leader who cares deeply about the professional development and personal well-being of his staff, and as a master griller and steak slicer extraordinaire at the annual department head barbecues, very important. Whereas Mike is highly respected in his profession, demonstrated by his selection as American Public Works Association Silicon Valley Chapter's Public Works Leader of the Year in May 2017. And whereas Mike is recognized as an enthusiastic and capable rehabilitator of cars, trucks, cabooses, vineyards, and all things mechanical, often scanning the internet for hidden treasures, and is looking forward to completing many rebuilding projects. And whereas after 26 years of exemplary public service, attending and presenting at hundreds of council meetings, signing thousands of plans and staff reports, and giving many hours of dedicated and loyal service to the city of Mountain View, Mike will retire on May 15, 2020, a sad day in our city, whereas Mike's peers and co-workers wish him a long and happy retirement and are excited he will have time to finish his long list of projects and enjoy the relaxing environs of Ashland. Now, therefore, I, Margaret Abakoga, Mayor of the City of Mountain View, along with my colleagues on the City Council and City staff, do hereby express gratitude and appreciation to Michael A. Fuller for his extensive contributions to the employees, residents, and customers of the City of Mountain View, signed and sealed this 12th day of May 2020. And as you can tell from the long list of accomplishments, Mike's mark is on every part of the city, and we really do appreciate your 26 years of service, the manner, your enthusiasm, your commitment, your dedication. We will miss you sorely, but we really wish you all the best. You and that's your wife, I see on the screen too. Thank you for letting us have him for these many years. But we just yes, we give him back to you, and we wish you all the best in your next adventures. And if you'd like to say a few words tonight, we would love to hear from you. Thank you and congratulations. I got a big round of applause.
Thank you. I would, but I'll be brief. Of course, many people worked on those many projects. I've been blessed with the coworkers, the leadership of this city. I was hired 25 years ago because of something uniquely Mountain View. Other cities were laying off, and Mountain View was hiring. And one of the things I very much appreciate about this city is the city council. I have worked with many council members, and I very much respect your dedication. The hours are long. It probably seems thankless. I'm sure you're not doing it for the money, but it just seems like a genuine dedication to your community. And I just wanted to, since I'm here at my last council meeting, I just wanted to express that to all of you. Thank you to you and your predecessors for your great leadership of the city.
Thank you, and I think we have some council members who want to say a few words. Councilmember Matichak?
I do want to say a few words. That proclamation was spot on. It exactly characterized your contributions and your style, and I want to add that it has been an absolute joy to work with you. I so appreciate what you have done for the city and the great shape you've left the department in very capable hands. So thank you for everything you've done, and all the best.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry that the sheltering in place doesn't allow us to get together and celebrate your accomplishments in retirement, but please know that we all truly, sincerely want to thank you. I personally have had an opportunity to work with you for almost 15 years now, and I just remember from day one how kind and considerate and patient you were in guiding me along. And so thank you again for everything you've done for all of us in the city of Mountain View, and we wish you well and hope you'll come back. Maybe once we're out of the sheltering in place, we could do a little celebration. But again, thank you so much, and best wishes to the both of you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I think City Manager, did you have some comments?
Yes, thank you. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. It wouldn't let me hear. So I just wanted to speak on behalf of the organization and the department head team, and thanking Mike for all of his years of service. And I think I can speak on behalf of my predecessors that he worked with, that Mike is a consummate professional, and he is so respected and so well liked in the organization. And I think that he has just really exemplified excellence in leadership, and also just showing his team what it means to care and do a good job too. So I just wanted to thank him, even in my short time here, for working with him, and just the work that he's been able to do and assist Dawn, our public works director, and all of the other public works staff. And just thank you so much for everything you've done over all these years. And like I said, on behalf of everyone, we wish you the best. I know that you'll have many adventures ahead of you, and I hope you're not going to go too far from us. But thank you so much for everything. I really appreciate it, and I know that everyone else does too.
Oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. And the department is in very good hands in Dawn Cameron.
I have a hand up in the attendee box from a member of the public. I'm going to see Shawnee Kleinhaus. Were you wishing to speak?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mike, thank you so much for everything that you've done to make Mountain View a special city for Audubon and other environmental organizations to work with, and for all you've done at North Bayshore and Shoreline to protect the birds and their habitat. It's been such a pleasure to work with you. There's no parallel and no equal in the area. I can honestly say that. I've been working in this area for 10 years. Even this week, which is Mike's last week, he helped restore a little piece of habitat over at Coast Casey for the swallows that are coming back to nest. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and have a wonderful time in retirement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you again, Mike, and best wishes.
Thank you very much.
And we have a couple of other proclamations. This is a busy week. So we learned last week that today is actually the last day, but starting on May 6th, this has been National Nurses Week, And so I'd like to read a proclamation in honor of National Nurses Week. Whereas May 6th through May 12th, 2020 is designated as National Nurses Week to coincide with Florence Nightingale's birthday on May 12, 1820. And whereas registered nurses of the city of Mountain View provide exceptional care to the city's residents and are known for serving patients with compassion, expertise, and caring. And whereas registered nurses provide leadership and support to clinical services in providing education, care management, risk management, and quality improvement to ensure care delivery meets nationally recognized standards of care. And whereas the demand for nursing services is greater than ever due to the aging American population, the increased complexity of patient care, continuing expansion of life-sustaining technology, and growth of community-based services to support sustaining independence at home. And whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has placed registered nurses along with other healthcare providers and first responders at the forefront of fighting the crisis by risking their own lives to care for their patients. And whereas the City of Mountain View is grateful to the numerous registered nurses in the community for the outstanding care they provide, which enriches the lives of residents through healing, outreach, and education of the next generation of nurses. Now, therefore, I, Margaret Abe-Koga, Mayor of the City of Mountain View, along with my colleagues on the City Council, do hereby proclaim May 6th through May 12th, 2020 as National Nurses Week, signed and sealed this 12th day of May 2020. And I just want to offer my gratitude on behalf of the city for the many nurses out there on the front lines during this pandemic, and we really appreciate and the care that our nurses provide to our patients in the community. So in the final proclamation, 3.3, the clerks did not tell me this. I had to learn this from another mayor from another city, so we're actually a little late. But last week was Municipal Clerks Week. I'd like to read the proclamation on that behalf. Whereas the professional municipal clerk, a time-honored and vital part of local government, exists throughout the world, and whereas the municipal clerk is the oldest among public servants, and whereas the municipal clerk provides the link between the community, the local governing bodies, and agencies of government at other levels, and whereas municipal clerks have pledged to be ever mindful of their neutrality and impartiality, rendering equal service to all, and whereas the municipal clerk serves as the information center on functions of local government and community, and whereas municipal clerks continually strive to improve the administration of affairs of the clerk's office through participation in education programs, seminars, workshops, and the annual meetings of their state, county, and international professional organizations, and whereas it is most appropriate that we recognize the accomplishments of the city clerk's office. Now, therefore, I, Margaret Abe-Koga, Mayor of the City of Mountain View, along with my colleagues on the City Council, do recognize the week of May 3rd through May 9th, 2020 as Municipal Clerks Week, and further extend our appreciation to our City Clerk, Lisa Matouche, our City Clerk's office staff, Deputy City Clerk Wanda Wong, Secretary Margarita Herrera, and all municipal clerks for the vital services they perform and their exemplary dedication to the communities they represent. Signed and sealed this 12th day of May 2020. I cannot thank our city clerk and our city clerk's office enough. You keep everything running and running well and smoothly, and we're so grateful to have you. Thank you for your service, City Clerk Matouche, and your entire staff.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, for your patience during all the proclamations. We'll move on to item 3.4, which is our COVID-19 update by our city manager.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so we are in week 10 of the shelter in place. I think I've started every presentation like this, and unlike other meetings, I have a much shorter update this evening, but I think I have some good things to report, some information that's happening this week, and then also some of the regular updates that I provide. So I wanted to start, as usual, with the Together MV update to our donation fund. And so right now, the fund is at $116,400. We have 325 donations that have been given to the Rent Relief Fund, and 291 donations that have gone to the business fund. And that is an increase of, I believe it is approximately 41 more from last week. So again, I just wanted to thank the members of the community who have donated to this fund. We continue to see increases every week, and I think it just really speaks to the generosity of the residents in our community and how much people really care about their neighbors. And another update that I wanted to provide, that is a weekly update, is on our Rent Relief program update. So as of the 8th, we've had around 1,800 applications submitted, and currently we have 306 households that have been assisted, and there's 139 households that are awaiting payment. Now we have around 1,400 applications pending, and our city funding that we have provided for this program has been spent approximately $641,000. And you'll see the percentage breakdown of the area median income. It hasn't really changed that much week over week. We continue to see most of the checks going towards those people who are in the 0 to 30% range, over 50% AMI. And I also wanted to provide an update on the redeployment of city staff. I believe that I briefly mentioned this in prior updates. And last week we had 8 city staff who were redeployed to community-based organizations or who are working on our relief efforts. And that was about 62 hours worth of assistance. That includes working with food delivery, assistance to seniors at their personal residences, also food distribution assistance with CSA on site. And we have also had 4 staff on site at CSA to provide translation services in Spanish, Russian, and Chinese. And we expect to continue this redeployment during the shelter-in-place order as city.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your participant. You have entered the meeting as a panelist. Attendees can now hear you speak. This meeting is being recorded.
You have to wear them. It essentially makes the face mask required. And I also wanted to mention that our police department is hosting a drive-through mask distribution tomorrow, Wednesday, May 13th, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Shoreline Amphitheater Lot A. And the police department will be giving away up to 4 free masks per vehicle. So if you need masks, I encourage you to come visit during that time period from 10 a.m. again to 3 p.m. tomorrow. And I just wanted to provide some other updates about questions that we have been asked a lot recently. And the first one that I wanted to provide an update on is about car parades. And the recent direction from the county shelter-in-place regarding the prohibition of these car parades or birthday brigades or caravans has really prompted a lot of these questions. And I wanted to provide some context on the county's decision, and it was based on the sensitivity for car-based gatherings for large events such as religious services or Cinco de Mayo celebrations, also for any drive-in movies and things of that nature, and there were public health concerns about that. But that being said, our Mountain View Police Department have not observed any parades, and we have not received any calls for service for parades. And if we would receive a call, we would only respond based on available resources. So this is not a high priority call for service, and it would be handled as those resources are allowed. Essentially, our police department is very focused on education of the order and making sure that our community understands the public health expectations. We did receive clarification that government entities could provide drive-by birthday celebrations as part of our ability to provide essential services. And so as such, 2 police cars can make visits for community requests. Then I also wanted to provide an update on data regarding calls for service over the public health order. So currently we have handled over 300 public health order calls for service, and only 9 citations for 4 separate incidents have been issued as of just this past Thursday, May 7th. And the majority of those have been issued to suspects for crimes that were unrelated to the health order in the community. So we are, again, as I said, really focused more so on the education component of the order. And I also wanted to mention the fact that staff is working on a plan for closing Castro Street potentially over the summer, depending on when the shelter-in-place order is modified. And I know we've received different inquiries on this, and there are other cities that are looking at this, and this is something that staff has been looking at and analyzing. A variety of departments are working on this over the past month or so. So we will have more information on what this might look like as the order is modified, and obviously we will make sure that we are keeping safety and health of the community top of mind, while also making sure that we can promote restaurants that may be open at that time once the shelter-in-place order is modified. So I did want to let everyone know that this is in the works and to stay tuned for more information on that. And I also wanted to provide a couple updates from our county. And currently, the county is in process of really quickly expanding their infrastructure for contact tracing and testing. And over this past week, they have reached out to local government agencies across the county, and they are looking at having more than 700 people in place as contact tracers to perform work countywide, so that we can really ramp up our efforts on tracing and investigating positive cases and people in households that may be around people that are testing positive, making sure that they are locating and quarantining people. So again, this is something that is in the works right now, and the county is really expecting more information to come about this in the next couple weeks. Then the last thing that I wanted to mention is that the Public Health Department gives updates to the public every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 a.m. on their Facebook page. And this is available for the public to watch. So oftentimes we don't know all of the detailed information that's happening unless we read it in the news or we hear about it through social media. But you can watch these briefings 3 times a week, where they will provide the latest information on programs and what's happening in the community, what's happening countywide. So I wanted to make sure that people knew that as well. Then another data point that the county has issued lately is that Since March 17th, when the stay-at-home order took effect, there have been there's been research released by Big Cities Health Coalition that estimates that through our shelter-in-place efforts, Santa Clara County residents have saved more than 7,400 lives in our area alone just by sheltering in place. So by staying home, we've made a collective sacrifice that has prevented infections, hospitalizations, and a large number of deaths. So I wanted to thank everyone for continuing to follow the rules and the shelter-in-place order, and just making sure that we're keeping our community healthy and safe. And as per usual, I wanted to remind everyone that the census is still underway, and self-reporting has been extended to October 31st. So I would ask everyone to make sure that they're completing their census, and also that they can sign up for our now twice-a-week community briefing by texting MV-COVID to 22828. And with that, I am open for any questions.
Thank you, City Manager. Are there any questions from our council members? I don't see any. So we're actually going to open this up for public comment. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak, if you're in the attendee box on Zoom, please hit the raise hand button at the bottom, or if you're on the phone, hit star 9. I don't see anyone. City Clerk, do we have any other public comments?
No other public comment, Mayor. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the update. We'll close this item and move on to our consent calendar then. So before we proceed, I have a note here. On item 4.2, the zoning text amendments regarding accessory dwelling units, family daycare centers, and planned community permits, the second reading. Based on information we received on Friday after the agenda was published, community development staff will require additional time to refine the ADU regulations. An appropriate motion for item 4.2 will be to not consider the second reading of the ordinance, but instead bifurcate the ADU sections of the ordinance from the sections related to family daycare centers and planned community permits, and return to council with the reintroduction of 2 separate ordinances in the future. So if there's a motion, if you could please include that in the motion, I would appreciate it. And these items will be approved by one motion unless any member of the council wishes to remove an item for discussion. The reading of the full text of resolutions will be waived unless a council member requests otherwise. Would any member of the council like to pull an item? Yes, Councilmember Hicks.
I don't want to pull an item, but I just want to ask a question on it and then put it back in the chat.
Okay. Let me see if anyone else wants to pull an item. I don't see any. So let's see, let me go to the public. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on any items on the consent calendar? If so, please hit the raise hand button if you're in the attendee box on Zoom, or hit star 9 if you're on the phone. I don't see any, so I'll close, actually go to the city clerk. Do you have any other public comment for any consent items?
No, I don't, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Then why don't I go to you, Councilmember Hicks, with your question?
My question is on 4.7, which is the, I won't read the full title, but the slurry seal resurfacing. So a member of the public asked, they said that they had been very happy in the past when the slurry seal program was done in the past, that to help pedestrians cross, that there'll be solid lane markings included for several feet leading up to the crossing location, so that I guess cars weren't crossing in interrupting pedestrians, and that staff agreed to do that in the past, and he was just hoping to encourage pedestrian safety, that would be continued. So I just thought I would ask that.
Thank you. As I recall, it was specific to Shoreline Boulevard, and we did receive confirmation from our traffic engineers that that will continue to be part of the striping plan.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark?
I will attempt this motion if it's all right with everyone. So I will move the consent calendar, which includes item 4.2, which is, in this case, is to not consider the second reading of the ordinance, but instead bifurcate the ADU sections of the ordinance from the sections related to family daycare centers and planned community permits, and return to council with the introduction of two separate ordinances in the future. Item 4.3, adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 35 of the City Code relating to discontinuation of water service for non-payment, to be read in title only, for the reading made attachment 1 of the council report. Item 4.4, adopt a resolution certifying the result of the canvass of returns for the special municipal election held on March 3rd, 2020 for ballot Measure D, amendment to the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act, to be read in title only, for the reading waived. And 4.5, adopt a resolution rescinding resolution number 18176, upholding the zoning administrator's approval of a planned community permit, a provisional use permit, development review permit, and a heritage tree removal permit to construct a new hotel and remove 3 heritage trees at 870 Long Drive, to be read in title only, for the reading waived.
Thank you, Councilmember Clark. Is there a second? Councilmember Ramirez?
Yes, I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the consent calendar? If not, could we have a roll call vote, please, City Clerk?
Councilmember Clark?
Yes.
Councilmember Hicks?
Yes.
Councilmember Matacek?
Yes.
Councilmember McAllister?
Yes.
Councilmember Ramirez?
Yes.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Kanay?
Yes.
Mayor Abitoga?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries 7-0 with no abstentions. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 5, oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the council from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on a non-agenda item? If so, if you're in the attendee box, please hit the raise hand button. If you're on the phone, please hit star 9. And I do have Chris Chambers. Welcome. You should be on.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm here to promote a program called Bike Match Silicon Valley. Bike Match SD is a program that matches people who cannot afford a bicycle to those who really need a bicycle. And the program is such that individuals who cannot afford a bicycle can fill out a simple form and apply to get a free bicycle. And the priorities for essential trips, but all transportation needs will be considered. And then we're also been promoting, if you have a bike in your garage or somewhere else that you're not using, you can donate through the bicycle exchange. And we'll match you with the recipient, and if it needs a bit of work, bicycle exchange will refurbish the bike and give it new life and give it to the person who really needs the bicycle. And if you want to help with the effort, you can make a donation to cover the cost of bike parts or pay for a used bike, etc. So people out of the public, if you need a bike and you can't afford one, or you have a bike you're not using or would like to donate, or you'd like to donate, you can do a Google search for Silicon Valley Bicycle Exchange, and there's a form for all purposes that is available in English and Spanish, and we're working on getting a version in
Cantonese and Mandarin shortly. Or you can call 650-417-3091 and leave a message. And I'm doing this as part of a volunteer for the Silicon Valley Bicycle Exchange and the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wishing to comment on a non-agenda item? If not, City Clerk, do we have any other public comments?
No other comments received after 5 p.m. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I will close oral communications, and we will move on to item 6, public hearing. And item 6.1 is the renewal of our downtown parking maintenance and operation assessment district number 2 for fiscal year 2020-21. And we have a staff presentation by our business development specialist, Tiffany Chu. Welcome.
Thank you. Let me just, could I get my screen to share? Oh, okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you, and good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. Tonight is the annual renewal of the Downtown Parking Maintenance and Operation Assessment District for fiscal year 2021. This is the first of 2 public hearings to renew the parking district. As a reminder, the parking district is on the map before you in the dashed line, and it supports the overall maintenance and operations of the downtown public parking system. The district's revenues come from property owner assessments, interest earnings, property taxes, and parking permit revenues. The parking permit revenues are used for ongoing maintenance and operations and implementation of downtown parking permit programs. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to take comment on the proposed annual assessment of $158,606 and to preliminarily approve the engineer's report. Any proposed changes to the report will be revised for the June 23, 2020 public hearing. Each year, the assessment formula is uniformly applied to all property owners within the district, and the formula is based on land use and parking requirements within the district. Any changes to assessment, boundaries, or formula would require a district vote. Each property owner in the parking district is notified of the assessment in accordance with state and city requirements. This concludes staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. True. Any questions from council members? Councilmember McAllister?
Yeah, this only comes to us once a year?
Correct. This comes to you once a year.
And this could be the last time I could ask about assessment fees? Okay, I'm done, because I saw Chris smile. I did that for Chris. That's all I wanted to do. Thank you.
After 8 years, Chris. Any other questions from council members on this item? If not, I will go to public comment. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on this item and you are in the attendee box on Zoom, please hit the raise hand button at the bottom, or if you're on the phone, hit *9. I don't see any hands raised. City Clerk, are there any other public comments?
No other public comments. Thank you.
Great, then I will close public comment and bring it back to council for deliberation and a motion. Happy to entertain a motion, Councilmember McAllister.
If I can't discuss the fees, I'll make the motion. So, I make a motion to adopt the resolution preliminary approving the annual engineer's report for the Downtown Parking Maintenance and Operation Assessment District number 2 for fiscal year 2020-21 to be read in title only. Further reading way attachment to the council report.
Thank you, Councilmember McAllister. Is there a second, Councilmember Matichak? Yep. I'll second the motion. Thank you.
I was hoping Chris would do it.
Thank you, Councilmember McAllister, for the motion, second by Councilmember Matichak. Any other discussion on this item? If not, could we get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Hicks. Yes. Councilmember Matichak.
Yes.
Councilmember McAllister.
For the last time on this subject, yes.
Councilmember Ramirez.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kamei.
Yes.
Mayor Abikoga.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries 7-0 with no abstentions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Chu. We'll go on to item 6.2, the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance Modifications. And we have our staff presentation by Assistant Community Development Director Wayne Chen. Welcome, Mr. Chen.
Hi, good evening. How are you all? Let me just take a moment to share my screen. Okay. And then it's coming up here. Here we go. Okay. I apologize. It is trying to access. Let's see. There we go. There you go. Thanks for your patience. Apologies for that. So wanted to thank Tim Wong and the CSFRA staff for working on this item. I'm Wayne Chen, Assistant Community Development Director, and I believe we'll also be having Karen Tiedemann, who will be joining this presentation. Karen Tiedemann from Goldfarb and Littman helped provide the analysis of SB 330, and also to help us understand the complexities of the bill and how it would interact with the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance. And she'll be here online as well, should there be any questions. Just a brief background. The trail modification item surfaced back in October 2019 when Council held a study session on the displacement response strategy. And during that time, there was input to staff to bring trail modifications ahead of other potential strategies. Staff went to work on that, and in the meantime, SB 330 went into effect at the beginning of the year. So we did have to spend some time to understand this new law. There are a lot of components to it, and it is has complexities, and so we did spend some time there. Then in February of 2020, Council provided the 5 specific modifications for the staff to incorporate as part of the trail modifications. So just briefly, the trail has certain key provisions. First one is that it is for tenants who are earning up to 120% AMI. The relocation benefit is 3 months of the median monthly rent. And there is a provision of $3,000 on top of the 3 months for special circumstance situations. And there is a subscription to a rental agency as part of the trail program. It applies to rental units that are under the Community Stabilization Fair Rent Act. And for units that are not under the CSFRA, it would apply to apartment buildings with 3 or more units. So this slide shows the 5 specific modifications that the Council directed staff to incorporate back in February. And the first one is to expand the eligibility threshold for the income limits. The second is to have an additional $5,000 on top of the $3,000 already in the TREO to have enhanced assistance by AutoTemp, to modify the payment schedule for the TREO relocation amount. And then also there's this component for landlords to waive certain obligations for tenants to provide more flexibility. We'll talk a little bit about that in a later slide. This item went to the EPC last month. EPC did unanimously support the modifications. There were some clarifying revisions, and we'll go over that in just a moment. And the EPC also did talk about the possibility of staying tuned, better understanding SB 330, given its newness and its complexities, and potentially incorporating some of those SB 330 provisions into the TRAO, but to sort of monitor that. As I mentioned, SB 330 is a new law. There are a lot of provisions to it. There's a replacement requirement component. And for the purposes of the TRAO, there is a relocation benefit component within SB 330. So a lot of analysis was just trying to understand, where does the TRAO apply? Where does SB 330 apply? And what happens when both apply? So this slide is a summary comparing sort of the coverages for SB 330 and for TRAO. And I'll just kind of flag some of the key things. For the SB 330 and TRAO, the AMI levels, the TRAO does have that 120% AMI level. And the SB 330 is a little bit more complex. What it does is it actually covers certain types of protected units. That includes rent-stabilized units, deed-restricted units, units that have been removed from the rental market, and then units that are occupied by low and very low-income tenants. And so, for example, if there is a displacement situation where a higher-income household is occupying a rent-stabilized unit, they do qualify for the benefits. So that's sort of the difference with SB 330. And then in situations where there are unoccupied units and there's no way to prove who lived there, then there's a presumption that they were low-income residents, and that's another layer. A major difference between SB 330 and TRAO is the amount of the relocation. So the TRAO has a 3-month comparable rent, a benchmark. SB 330 has a methodology where you compare the current rent, and then you calculate the difference between the comparable rent, and it's 42 times that difference. So that's a different methodology, and based on the math, it's quite a bit higher than the TRAO. And you can see some of the other differences between SB 330 and TRAO. I want to just try to visualize this a little bit to show the coverage. And these are more sort of conceptual categories of coverage. It is a little bit challenging to try to line them up exactly numerically, but both the TRAO and SB 330 covers fully covered CSFRA units. And then on the TRAO side, on the left bar, it also covers units not under the CSFRA if there's 3 or more units in that building. If we move over to the SB 330, you can see the 3 other categories that SB 330 covers. It also covers the deed-restricted affordable housing units. It covers, again, units occupied by low-income and very low-income folks. And also rental units that were taken away from the market, which may have caused displacement. And so they don't quite overlap and map onto the TRAO, but these give you the kind of conceptual categories where relocation benefits would apply. So the first item is to add the $5,000 to the income limit threshold to qualify more households for relocation benefits. And so you can see the income limits for the 120% category, and then you can see the bottom line where we add 5,000. That shows you where the income limits have increased to, and that's where the threshold is. So that has been incorporated. The second one is the $5,000 for the special circumstance household. And there are various special circumstances that may require additional assistance to help with the relocation. That's what this is about. I do want to just flag in the report, the modification was changing the $3,000 to $5,000, the $2,000 difference. But the revised modification is actually $5,000 on top of the current $3,000 for a total of $8,000. So that's the revised modification that would be incorporated into the set of modifications. Enhanced rental services, that's been incorporated. I won't read the details. And this item is when the tenant would receive a second payment, there's the ability to get the second payment sooner to assist with the relocation. So that has been incorporated. And then this item was for the ability for landlords to waive their rights to receive a 30-day move-out notice from the tenant. And this was not incorporated because it's actually state law to require this. And so the modification made in the TREO guidelines is to say, this is something you can do, landlords, on a voluntary basis, but it would need to be voluntary. And then a couple of additional modifications is to actually incorporate the recording of on the property that there are TREO requirements on a particular property. That way, if the property is ever transacted and the future owner knows that there are these requirements, it's one other way for a future property owner to be aware of it. And then we added a general language just because we're still learning about SB 330, and there may be things that emerge that we'll be applying later on, but the general language allows us to be able to apply the stricter of the TREO or SB 330 or other state requirements as appropriate, and the stricter of the two would prevail. So this is the recommendation to introduce an ordinance amending the tenant relocation assistance ordinance with the preceding modifications, and that concludes staff's presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Shen. Any council members with questions on this item? Councilmember McAllister?
Yeah, on one of the first tables you did, it didn't make sense to me about on that one, where it says unoccupied units with no income documentation. Well, if the units are occupied, why would, I don't understand that it's not applicable. So what are we talking, how does that play out?
Yeah, I think that was just additional information that is part of SB 330, and I'll ask Karen to jump in as needed. But part of this is just to demonstrate that SB 330 has a wide variety of provisions, and that in the case where under a replacement requirement provision, and a developer is needing to replace the units, but there's no way to document who lived there before it goes to this 80% threshold. But it doesn't necessarily apply to relocation benefits specifically. And I'll see if Karen has any additional color to add.
Hi, good evening. So what Wayne said is correct. SB 330 has a variety of obligations. The relocation obligations don't specifically apply to unoccupied units, but there still is a replacement obligation that the units have to be replaced. And there's a presumption as to whether those units were occupied by very low or low-income households based on the percentage of very low and low-income renters, unless it can be proven otherwise that they were occupied by above low-income households. So that's why that information is there, just because there's multiple requirements in 330 with regard to protected units, not just relocation.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Replacement units, that context I needed. Okay, and then the last question I had is the tenants need to be current on their rent to be eligible for relocation assistance, and that's true for both of the SB 330 and federal.
Well, I'll do my best to try to articulate it, and again, Karen, if you're able to jump in. But the trail provisions, it really hooks to the notion of an event, of a displacement event, and a displacement event. If a tenant is behind on the rent, and being behind on the rent is a provision where there could be a just cause eviction, then they wouldn't receive the benefit. So in effect, yes, under TRAO, tenants need to be current on the rent. SB 330 makes it a little bit more nuanced and complex, and SB 330, as I understand it, is it's whether the tenant is still physically occupying the unit, and whether they are current on rent or not is different. They could be behind on rent, but if they haven't been evicted and if actions haven't been taken to proceed with the eviction, then if the tenant is still in the unit, they would still be able to qualify for the relocation benefits. But I'll turn it over to Karen to see if she has any clarifications or additional thoughts to add.
Yeah, I think the way Wayne described it is accurate. The SB 330 adopts state relocation law, and you are eligible for relocation benefits under that unless you've actually been evicted. So if you haven't paid your rent but you haven't been evicted, you would still be eligible for relocation benefits.
Would that be the full benefit or part of the benefit minus the rent due?
That is not specified in the law. I will tell you, when we do relocations for other purposes, like when public agencies acquire property, we would generally deduct the owed rent from the benefits. But that's sort of more in practice than we have actual guidelines for.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ramirez?
Thank you, Mayor. I only have one question, and that's related to the alternative mitigation language in the ordinance. So I think having an opportunity to present some alternative solution is fine, but I'm wondering whether SB 330 really allows for that, and in practice, what an alternative mitigation to the provisions in SB 330 might look like.
Again, I'll try to take a first cut, and then again ask Karen to jump in. But the words alternative mitigation don't appear in SB 330, and so as we were trying to analyze and understand SB 330 and TRAO, I think there's the concept that alternative mitigation under a TRAO could be allowed, but there need to be a way to demonstrate that alternative mitigation is comparable or exceeds what is also in SB 330, and that's where the general language that we thought was helpful to make as part of the modification is to say the stricter of the two, and then in some ways it's a case-by-case basis to see the particulars of any particular case, to apply the filter of the TRAO analysis and then the filter of SB 330. And proceed with analysis that way without further sort of guidance of SB 330 about this alternative medication. The notion is that we'll have this general provision in the TRAO modification and evaluate on a case-by-case basis with a two-lens analytical approach. I'll turn it over to Karen and see if she has additional thoughts to add or clarifications.
Yeah, so part of what SB 330 says is that you specifically can continue to include local benefits to the extent that they are greater than SB 330 provides. So if you could come up with alternative mitigation measures that are greater than what 330 provides, then theoretically you could adopt those. But you're right, SB 330 doesn't really discuss alternative mitigation measures, so it really would have to be greater benefits than SB 330 to meet the standard and qualify.
And thank you. Is staff comfortable with not really addressing that ambiguity in the TRAO, or would it be helpful to say something like, where SB 330 applies, maybe we don't have an alternative mitigation option, but where TRAO applies, then you could provide an alternative mitigation.
Maybe I'll kind of think through this for a second and see if Karen has anything to add. But I think that could be a policy direction that council could direct. Have to incorporate. Part of the thinking, just trying to think here, is also the sunsetting, the 5-year sunset for the SB 330, and whether that's something that would need to be revisited if SB 330 sunsets. But if it sunsets, maybe it all goes away anyway. But maybe I'll see if Karen has any thoughts, or if she's seen any other jurisdictions kind of address this question.
Yeah, I don't think anybody else has addressed this question, but I think we did talk about this morning among staff. I think the language as it stands, the alternative mitigations are subject to City Council approval. And so any alternative mitigation would be brought to you with recommendation from staff that it has to at least conform to SB 330 for those units that are considered protected units. So we could add language, or I think it is really covered because it is a discretionary approval by the City Council at all times.
And I would just add to that, this is Christian. Karen's absolutely correct. I do think the language as drafted provides for that latitude, and we drafted specifically, or we wanted it to be general to allow for that consideration, but it would take a close look by staff, and then also it is ultimately approved by council. So I believe the language is sufficient, unless there's strong council desire to make it more specific.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember Hicks.
So my first question is, assuming we adopt these modifications, on what date would they take effect?
This is a introduction of an ordinance, so then the second reading would be scheduled. I believe that's in the second reading is June 9th, and then they would take effect 30 days after that.
Okay. June 39th. Okay, thank you. And then my second question is just, I just wanted to make sure I understood that staff is recommending increasing special circumstance payment for households consistent of $5,000 to $8,000, consistent with the 777 West Middlefield agreement. Is that what you're recommending? Did I understand that right?
That's correct.
Okay, I support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members with questions? If not, I will open this up for public comment. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on this item and you're in the attendee box, please hit raise hand at the bottom. And if you're on the phone, please hit *9. I don't see any. City Clerk, do we have any other public comments?
No other public comment received after 5 p.m. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I will close public comment and bring it back to council for deliberation and motion. Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you, Mayor. First, thank you to staff for bringing this back relatively quickly. And I also want to thank everyone at the council for supporting expediting review of the TRAO back in February when we were modifying our work plan. I think this is an important item, given that there are, there's still, I think, a handful of displacement projects, even despite SB 330 in the pipeline that this will apply to further down the road. I support the staff recommendations. I think that the clarification or the modification to the special circumstances household I'm comfortable with. That was also voluntarily provided by Dividend Homes in their 2310 Rock Street proposal, which formed the basis for each of these modifications. And based on that, I'm comfortable with proceeding with that. There are two things I would like to see if there's any support for. The first relates to language access. So I asked the question in the written question submitted in advance about whether the TRAO has any requirements related to language access. And it sounds like there are some accommodations made when requested, but and this is anecdotal, right? So I'm not sure if this is a widespread problem, but I think it would be helpful also to provide the notice of intent and any materials related to the TRAO in, at the very least, the languages that sort of the most commonly spoken languages in Mountain View. And maybe it doesn't have to be, a full replication of the document, in Spanish, Chinese, and Russian. Maybe there's another way of doing this, but I have heard enough times that there are some challenges associated with folks who don't speak English, and consequently maybe have a sort of a delayed understanding or delayed access to some of the benefits here. So I don't know. I didn't come prepared with language for this, but if this is something that could be incorporated into the motion, if staff is comfortable with this, I think it would be helpful just to make sure that folks, as soon as they receive notice, it's provided in the preferred language. And then the other modification would be, special circumstances households, I think, are pretty well covered at this point. But if you aren't in that category, so let's say you're 60, or you just don't meet any of the parameters, the 3 months that you get or in the value of a comparable unit, I think could help pay for security deposit, first, last month's rent, that kind of thing. But you're out on your own for moving expenses, and so I'd like to see if there would be support for a modest addition for moving expenses for non-special circumstances households. And I don't really have a figure. I don't know if it's easier just to do a straight, I don't know if it's $250 or $500 or something in that range, or if we want to make it, if we'd rather not arbitrarily select a figure, maybe just have the developer, reimburse any costs, and the tenant who's being displaced would simply just provide evidence of moving expenses. So those are the two things I'd like to sort of gauge interest in, but other than that, I'm comfortable with the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Councilmember McAllister?
That introduced an ordinance amending Article 8 of Chapter 36 of the Mountain View City Code related to tenant relocations assistance to be read in title only. Further reading waived and set second reading for June 9th, 2020, and to provide language translations where needed for the town. And I don't want to include put that in the motion, but I don't want to do one for living expenses. I'd rather see us do a little study and see what some prices are, and then I think we could bring that back later. But I'm a little concerned about bringing out an arbitrary number at this point, but I am willing to review it down the road.
Thank you. So there's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? I see City Attorney. Would you like to make comments?
I just wanted, maybe I should have waited for the second, but I just wanted to identify the section for the record with the language. The additional language requirement would be 36.3825A1, A1, and I just wanted to get clarity on what additional languages.
I would just say as needed.
Okay.
Identified as needed. So.
Okay.
I think that would be broad enough to cover everybody.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, thank you.
So, is there a second, Councilmember Hicks?
I would second, and tell me if I'm doing this right. I would second it if I could add if Councilmember McAllister would accept two little changes to that.
Let's hear them.
So the two changes are, what if we quantify the moving at $300? That seems like fairly modest for moving. And the second one is something that I think is an easy change and kind of an oversight. The way it reads now, which I think is probably a mistake, it says that you're eligible for special circumstances payout if you have a child that's under 18, which means 17, but actually if you're graduating from high school, normally you're 18, and I think that changing it, I would actually change it to 20 or 21, but let me just start with the 18. If you're, I think this will affect probably very few families, so not really affect the, it's a small change. I think it will not really affect the developers very much, but I think it could be potentially extremely important to a family. I would hate that you would not get the extra payment and maybe have to move into a smaller unit because you had a 17-year-old. You know, I personally, having teenagers who just graduated from high school, you know, just getting that final year done, I think is really important. So again, I think that changing it at least to under 19 or say 18, that little modification would be good. I personally also, like I said, just experiencing high schoolers, think it would be important. Many people are now going on to community college, and it's a help to be able to stay at home with your parents, not move into your own unit if your family is living in a small unit. I would change it to 20 or 21. So I'm hoping that you'll go for that.
Councilmember McAllister.
Yeah, I thought there was already provision there. Okay. Maybe it wasn't the council questions, but I thought I saw something about moving it to 18 or 19.
The place that I read that was a letter from Silicon Valley at Home, and they said 20 or 21, but at least to 18 rather than 17, as it currently, I think, mistakenly reads.
I can go to 19. I think that would be, people still would come out 19. And again, the arbitrary 300 is maybe too low, maybe too high. So I'll see if anybody else chimes in on that one. But we'll leave it at that for consideration C.
If I could just add, there is a moving expense schedule that we understand was published by Caltrans, and oftentimes that is a schedule that could be sort of more objectively referred to as a figure for moving expenses. So we could potentially look into that as an option.
Councilmember Hicks, would you accept review of what Mr. Chen just said about the moving expenses?
I would accept that, yes.
Okay, I would accept that too.
This is RT. I think we'd like a clarification of the languages because it appears that as needed would imply upon request, but I think the intention is to start out with translating to certain languages, and as needed is not specific enough. We could take the three Councilmember Ramirez mentioned, since they are the most commonly spoken, and that would get better direction.
But right now, if you limit it to 3 versus as needed, then, wouldn't that be fair? You could have some other dialect that someone speaks. So
we could add upon request. They could do additional, but I think the intent of this change was to have all the languages be done at the same time, and not to wait for a request. So we would need to know what as needed meant if we had to go translate that. We can also add upon request, we can translate to a language that is maybe not commonly spoken, but staff would like more clarity on which ones we start out with when we start with English.
That's fine, as per requested. That's fine.
Okay, and I would just want to add to that, that's what I was getting at earlier, and I think that the planning director, that's a good change. While we're on the topic of clarity, I just wanted to check with either the planning director or Mr. Chen about where the other specific amendments that Councilmember Hicks brought up, to make sure that we refer to them by the specific section in the document.
Yeah. Thank you very much, City Attorney. So a couple of thoughts is certainly ordinances in place. The other option, and that could provide greater flexibility in case there are other modifications that may wish to be made by council, is to put them in the administrative guidelines. So we could put moving expenses with a reference, for example, to the Caltrain moving schedule in the guidelines. We could also put some language in the guidelines regarding, essentially, I think the intent is a language access plan provision, and we can specify in there certain sort of baseline languages. But I think Councilmember Ramirez is also suggesting that we also take stock of the individual circumstances and see if there are particular needs for particular development, and then be responsive to that. So the guidelines could be one way to have the flexibility to make the modifications and update as needed, and then to sort of respond to that that concept.
And then as far as the age, the change to the age requirement, would you suggest that also being in the administrative regulations, or is there a specific change to the ordinance? I'm looking for it, and I can't seem to find that.
Yes, I also have the trail ordinance up, and I probably need to just search, and I'm wondering if, Karen, I don't know if you sort of know it well enough to point us to the direction, the place in the ordinance.
So the place in the ordinance is on page 5, and just go back to the section reference. So it's under definition 36.38.15. J. That's where special circumstances households are defined. So J3 is a household with one or more minor children under 18 years of age. And I think what's being proposed, although we should get this clarified, is it under 19 years of age, or is it 19 or under?
19 or under.
Okay, and I think for clarity's sake, that should be an amendment to the ordinance, to the section you just referenced, Karen, and then also the section that I referenced earlier, 36, 38, 25, the notice of intent section, that should be also modified to section 1A there. The language would be provide notice of intent in languages similar to provided in other relocation contexts, or we can just list the 3 main, or as needed for a particular household. And then we can still bolster that in the administrative regulations. And then just to be clear about the moving expenses, I want to be careful about if that is referred to in the ordinance, that we amend it as needed tonight.
Well, no, I was going to say that staff would review that as a potential guideline. We're not adapting it. We would just review it and then come back and adopt it if needed.
Okay. And if the seconder was okay with that, then we could proceed with this with the 2 revisions that I just read and clarified. We could proceed with that.
Wouldn't it be simpler and less time-consuming rather than bring it up as another item to just do it in the way that Mr. Chen suggested, incorporate it now? It sounds like the way Councilmember McAllister, the way you're suggesting it, just would bring it back to us yet again and be work for everyone.
But we don't know what the amount is. And again, I don't want to be bringing some arbitrary number unless we know that it's accepted or it's common. We want to be fair, but if we accept something without looking at it, that would not be responsible on my part.
Question: do we need to bring it back again, or can we bring it back as part of the second reading?
No, we should not add that as the second reading. I think we should address it tonight, and I'm looking for the section where we can add an amendment or a secondary motion to include that in the administrative guidelines. Mr. Chen, do you know which section that would be referred to, the non-special circumstances category that was referred to?
The problem is we don't know the amount tonight, and unless you have that, so that's why I don't think we can make a decision on this item. So either we pass this trail without living expenses for those non-special circumstances, or we set an amount, or we direct staff to do the study and bring it back to council. Those are our 3 options, I believe, Richmond.
Yes. Thank you for that clarification. Yes, I'd agree with that.
So I'll go back to Councilmember McAllister and ask you what you would like to do as part of the motion. And I also have Councilmember Matichak with her hand raised, so I want to get to her too.
I would refer living expenses for staff to return to the report.
With Councilmember Hicks as a seconder, do you support that?
Sorry, I'm having trouble with unmuting. I would rather just do an amount tonight, but if no one else will support that, then I would go along with the study.
We can go ahead and vote on this and see how it goes. So this will be to direct staff to do the study and bring it back to council. Councilmember Matichak, thank you for your patience.
So, my question was, do we have any idea, and Mr. Chen, did you say Caltrain or Caltrans?
Caltrans, yeah.
Caltrans? And I don't know anything about this, so do they specify, like, by size of household or how far you're moving, like the dollar amount, or how does that work?
So it's an allowance that's used for relocation, and it's based on the number of rooms in the household, and I'm looking for it online, but I can't find it. So it varies based on the number of rooms, and it's based on analysis of actual moving costs throughout the state.
So actually, I'll second the motion, Mr. McAllister, if we just don't cover moving expenses.
Well, my motion doesn't include it, just to have staff come back to review it for us.
Yeah, that's fine with me. So I'll second that motion if Councilmember Hicks won't.
So yes, so then the seconder will be Councilmember Matichak. Mr. Lastova, did you have some comments?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify with the city attorney that
we are looking at the language provisions. Could we refer it to the language access plan that Wayne is going to talk about in the administrative guidelines? So we say in English and subject to the language access plan required. That way we know exactly what languages we have to provide it in.
Yes, that's actually better. Yes.
I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make us flexible, you know.
May I ask a clarifying question for the moving expenses for the analysis? Would that be in addition to the potential relocation costs that may be an SP 330 requirement, which is the 42-month differential? So would it be in the TRAO there might be a moving expense component, and then we would run the SP 330 filter and have the filter, both filters with the moving expenses.
Why don't you bring both? That way you have a comprehensive study for us.
Okay, Councilmember Clark.
This is a little awkward, but I just I would prefer not to have this come back to us yet again. I would prefer to just say, like, look, we're giving you a lot of we're giving you a significant chunk of change that you can do for whatever purpose, and that includes moving and all these other things. And so to go out and do an analysis and have a separate moving component, I'd rather just increase the TRAO amount, frankly, and not specify this for moving or whatever. But I'd be fine. I would either pick a number now and include it, or I would just say, you know, moving is part of the expenses that we're already covering by providing you this additional amount. I don't want to go have staff study this and bring it back. So I would either just go with the staff recommendation as they put it, or I would choose an amount tonight, or you can address it through the administrative guidelines if you want. But I don't want to have to go through another TRAO meeting. It's really important, and staff has worked really hard to get this to us really quickly. I'd hate to have to go back and do another analysis of some other component of the TRAO.
Just if I made some information, I did find what appears to be guidelines of Caltrans cost schedule. This is from a few years ago, so we can look for the 2020 schedule or 2019 schedule. But just as reference, I found a 2014 schedule, and they have two provisions. It could be the actual costs, or there's a fixed moving schedule that is provided. And for example, one room at the 2014 rate is $450. A dorm style is $125. 4 rooms is $1,295, and 7 rooms is $2,090. I think those are the examples. So it kind of gives you a sense of the schedule that's used, and it's probably been adjusted for current rates, but just to provide that information.
So I'm going to modify my own motion, and then if somebody wants to make a second motion afterwards, I'll just leave moving expenses off at this moment, and then that will, and if somebody wants to make a motion for moving expenses, they can do that afterwards.
So the motion's been amended to take out moving expenses. Councilman Matuszek, the seconder, do you support that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you. Not to belabor the point, but so the provision, I'm looking at the staff report page 4, the SB 330 relocation provisions do include actual and reasonable moving expenses, and I don't know if there's state guidance for exactly how that's done, but so in some, when SB 330 is figured, those moving expenses would be required, and I assume there's some standard that we would have to incorporate for that case. But and it looks like it's not going to be included this time around. But if it does come back in the future update of TRAO, would we simply extend whatever definition is used for moving expenses from SB 330 into the TRAO as well?
This is R.T. Srivastava. I would like to respond by saying that our next step on TRAO would be to look at SB 330 take a look at what of those provisions council may want to include. That is part of the displacement strategy, and when we come back, we can bring that back together in one package. Look at the moving expenses as well.
Okay. And just for my benefit, Councilmember McAllister, so the motion is the staff recommendation plus the language access plan plus increase the age for I guess children and families for special circumstances to 19 and under. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Singer.
Great, thank you. I'm kind of glad I waited for all of this to work out just to be able to share that I'll be supporting the modified motion, the final, hopefully, modified motion from Councilmember McAllister and Councilmember Matashek. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank staff. I know that we brought this up during our council goals, and I was kind of afraid this would happen. We would say, hey, we just want to make these minor tweaks, and then it would come back and we'd say, oh, and include these. So I also am grateful to my colleagues for showing the restraint as well, because I think the idea was that, we really wanted to make a couple tweaks, and as I think Councilmember Clark said, it not to come back. And so I'm kind of happy with the place that we've landed, and really appreciate our chief comments that we can look at movie expenses at a later time when we have more information. I think given our expanded trail, what's going on with SB 330, I think it would also be interesting to see how those work in tandem, and if there are any type of places that are missing once those are working kind of in conjunction with each other, since this legislation just went into implementation in January, and the world is a very different place now than it was in January, and it continues to be. So I think the more time that we allow to kind of see how our new revised trail and SB 330 work in conjunction with one another is kind of the best way to go. All of that to say, thank you again to staff, and I will be supporting the new motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments by council members? If not, there's a motion by Councilmember McAllister, second by Councilmember Matashek. Could we get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Hicks.
Yes.
Councilmember Matashek.
Yes.
Councilmember McAllister. Councilmember McAllister?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Councilmember Ramirez?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kane?
Yes.
Mayor Abikoda?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries 7-0 with no abstentions. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff. And we will move on now to item 7, Council Staff Committee Reports. Are there any council members with reports? Yes, Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you, Mayor. So I don't have a report, but I spoke with the city manager earlier that the County Board of Supervisors today directed their council to return with an extension to their eviction moratorium, I think subject to some state actions. And what I think the city manager and city attorney have suggested is for us to provide similar direction. So once the county takes action, that we would come back with a simple extension to our own eviction moratorium, and just sort of align with the expiration date that the county is adopting. So I wanted to see if there was support for returning at whatever time appropriate. Yes, I'm not exactly sure what the time frame for the county is, but before the end of the month with just a simple eviction moratorium extension.
So, question. So they didn't actually adopt one today. They directed staff to come back with. So that would be possibly next Tuesday. Is that right?
Yes, I believe it's the 26th is their bring back date.
Okay. So So, question I had on this is our last meeting of the month is next Tuesday. So, does staff have any suggestions or recommendations on how we should proceed? If there's interest, I guess.
Yeah, if there's interest, it would probably be suitable. I know that nobody's really thrilled about an additional meeting, but it would probably take the form of a short special meeting. After the 19th may be too soon, so there may be, if there's council support, there may be a need for a short special meeting to consider just this ordinance extension.
Okay. So let me ask my colleagues if you can raise your hand if you would support bringing back the extension of the moratorium based on the county's order to be discussed and voted on at a special meeting after Tuesday, May 26th.
Question.
All right. Yes, Councilman McAllister.
So we adopted the state or the county's moratorium. Yes. So they're going to be reviewing it.
Correct.
So you're asking that our timeline would that we would be after they made their determination or before their determination?
So the question was, would we like to come back for a special meeting after the county has most likely extended their moratorium, and they're looking at doing that on May 26th, and we don't have a council meeting scheduled until June 9th, after next week, the 19th. So would you be willing to do a special meeting before or after the 26th?
But if they impose a moratorium, then we wouldn't have to meet because there is a moratorium in effect, correct?
The difference is that the county moratorium does not apply to mobile home residents, and ours does.
Okay.
That would be the only real change, I believe. So
we also have the noticing differences that the county doesn't specify. For instance, I think we require that a tenant has to provide notice to their landlord of their inability to pay rent within 7 days and then documentation within 14. And the county is silent, I think, on those parameters.
Yeah, that's correct. There are a couple local provisions, I'll call them, that cities and the county adopted their own ordinances, have city-specific. The main one is, of course, the mobile home applicability, but there are, as Councilmember Ramirez correctly states, other procedural requirements specific to Mountain View, which landlords have been following and tenants have been following. So, yes, there are some local provisions.
So the question again is whether council would be willing to have a special meeting after Tuesday, the 26th, to consider an extension of the moratorium based on the counties. If you would be willing to, would you please raise your hand? 2, 4, 6, 7. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. And we'll probably poll for a date that works for everyone.
Hey, can we do it Zoom?
Yes, we can do it. I'm expecting we'll be doing it by Zoom.
And also, there's a little more flexibility with special meetings. There's only 24 hours notice, so that'll make it a little bit easier.
Yes, thank you. And then City Manager?
Yes. Thank you. I don't know why I'm not able to raise my hand. Thank you, Mayor. So I did want to clarify that this would be like the emergency meeting that we called previously in March, where it could be, as the city attorney said, within 24 hours. And in looking at the date of May 26th, that is a Tuesday, and I am imagining that there might be some indication of the shelter-in-place order being modified around that time period as well, just because that's right before the end of the month. So I did want to just just make note of that we only have that 24-hour time period, and you can hold the meeting any day of the week, like we did on that Friday in March. So just FYI about that.
Thank you. Anything else, Councilmember Ramirez?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Matichak?
Thank you. I just want to report we had a meeting of the Council Finance Committee, which is Councilmember Clark, Councilmember Ramirez, and me, to discuss the council budget for next fiscal year. And we are recommending some changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Vice Mayor Kamei.
Thank you. So I just wanted to thank the city manager for her report during her COVID update. I know many of us have probably been receiving numerous emails, particularly about the face coverings. And so I just wanted to see if colleagues might be interested in passing a resolution regarding face coverings. I know that the Mountain View Police Department will be distributing face masks tomorrow, and they've actually collected through donations 5,000 face masks. And my idea is that it would be more of an educational opportunity to let people know about face coverings. I think there's still, even though the county put forward what they did, there's still a little bit of confusion, I think, on when you need to wear them and when you don't. And so I just wanted to see if others might be interested in something like that.
For a show of hands, interest in a resolution? So I guess if I could ask, what would that mean as opposed to an ordinance currently that the county's order?
So I know other communities have looked at ordinances, and really it's been something they want to do related to enforcement. I'm not looking to add more staff time to a new project. I think it's more with the resolution, hopefully, kind of similar to what we did in other cases. A recognition of face coverings rather than something that would be enforced by the police via an ordinance and be something punitive.
So I guess I need more clarification. If it's a resolution and if you're not looking for enforcement, I think that's basically what is being, it's a recommendation, a strong recommendation from the county, but also the county order says if you are a business that wants to open, your employees and customers are now required to wear face masks. So what in addition are you looking for then?
I think it's more of the educational component. If there's no interest, then that's fine. I think I've received a lot of personal feedback that, residents would like to see the city do more related to face coverings and make it a mandate. I'd prefer to go the resolution route to try to promote folks to wear face coverings and an educational opportunity about the benefits of doing so. When I have been out, people are not wearing them still, and though it is highly encouraged. So I think it would be perhaps maybe a symbolic gesture, but it's something that I was just trying to see if there was interest. So if there's not, then that's fine, but I thought I'd put it forward.
Okay, so I'm sorry, can I get a show of hands for those interested?
Well, I have a question about where staff is really working on other things right now. How much staff time and what are we actually, we're just saying, hey, wear a face mask? I'm trying to get more what's involved and the end result.
Thank you. Yeah. Vice Mayor, do you want to answer that, or staff, city manager?
Thank you, Councilmember McAllister. I think I can provide some context on this. So I think the difference between a resolution and an ordinance is the resolution obviously would just reinforce the current county order that's already in place, but also provide information in terms of the education, like Vice Mayor Kamei said, education to the community that this is required when you go in a business. It is required if you work at a business, and that the police department is passing out these free face masks, and that they have various face masks that are available to be donated. They have different campaigns going on where they're, like tomorrow, when they're going to be at Shoreline passing out face masks. So I think it's more so just the education component of it, whereas an ordinance certainly would require more staff time. It would require more analysis. It would obviously take more of an enforcement component for the police department. And, I know that there's a lot of interest in this, but I'm not really sure that the police department would truly be able to enforce this. And a lot of the people that might be enforced might be more of our homeless or unstably housed residents, which is why the police department is handing out face masks to that population to make sure that they do have masks. So I think a resolution could be an option for council to make sure that you're just informing the community of what the county order is, and also educating about the benefits of wearing the mask and what our police department is doing to help provide those masks.
I understand that, but what's involved in the passing a resolution and just doing all this informational stuff you're talking about?
So I think it would be just drafting the resolution, and so I see it being more of a simple, perhaps a 2-page document, something similar that we've already given a lot of information and updates, and it would just be putting that in narrative form. So I think it would be a lot simpler to do as opposed to an ordinance, certainly.
But once you do your resolution, you were saying we're going to be educating all these people. So what does that mean? You're going to be making flyers, you're going to go to the website, you're going to...
Sure, certainly. I think we could do all of those things. We would definitely be able to post it on our social media channels. We would be able to make sure that we are sending emails about it, flyers. We already have done hundreds of flyers that we've passed out to the community. So I think it would just really essentially be a continuation of what we've already done, should the council be interested in it.
So we'll be taking staff time then. It's not a simple resolution, we pass it, and then there's more involved with staff time.
Well, staff is already passing out flyers, so this is already something that the police department is doing weekly. And so, and also our multilingual outreach program is also passing out flyers every week on our efforts for our homeless and unstably housed, our food distribution efforts. So we are producing flyers every week, so I see this being something that we could incorporate as part of the flyers. It would just be another informational piece of information we're handing out.
Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager McCarthy. I mean, I think it's just, my intent was only to maybe codify and formalize what's already been existing. The police department staff are already working on this, and this was just to further highlight the efforts that staff are already doing, not to do any type of an additional workload.
Yes, my question is, since we're doing all of that anyway, my question, I'm not sure what the need for the resolution is, and I also, I guess my concern is when we do something like that, it can also be misconstrued the other way, that it's an ordinance, and we might be getting calls saying, please enforce this, and so I guess I just question whether it might actually confuse folks more than help clarify. So, but let me go ahead and take us. I don't think I actually took a show of hands yet. So, if you're interested in the resolution, could you please raise your hand? I only see 2. So, thank you. Councilmember McAllister.
Yes, we had a VTA meeting last week, and it was not a good meeting in the sense that ridership is down 78%. ETA is losing $18 million a month, and they expect to be in an operating deficit of $34 million for the year fiscal 2020. But that doesn't stop them from doing a notice of necessity to buy property for Eastridge Light Rail without having a dollar amount. So that was one interesting thing that they're moving forward with. And another deal that we voted on was to put express lanes on the southern part of State Route 85, south of 87. I voted no on it because 237 had a report on the express lanes. There are 3 lanes, and what it did, yes, if you were in the express lane and you paid money, you moved along. But it took the 2 general purpose lanes, it slowed down by about 10 minutes. So we are working on the State Route 85 study, but express lanes, when you're only at 3 lanes across, is compacting things too much. And so that is what I did, and that's what's happening at BTA. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members with report? I have a couple. Actually, Councilmember Ramirez and I participated on a phone call last Friday with a Silicon Valley Strong organizer, one of them, Jennifer Loving from Destination Home. And you probably know this, but I didn't mention it, but they've raised another round of funding. It's about $14 million. They're about to finish closing out the first round of $11 million that went to about 4,500 applicants. We did find out that about 140 folks from Mountain View did get some assistance from the first round. The second round, they're focusing on individuals who do not qualify for other assistance, like the stimulus package assistance from the federal government, and so they're asking for assistance in reaching out to those populations. I sent the information over to our multilingual outreach team, and they've actually already distributed the information to a lot of the grassroots organizations. But I'm happy to email that to all of you as well. If you can get the word out, that would be great. And this funding actually is not just for rent assistance. As my understanding, it could pay for other expenses. So, so please get the word out. And then I participated in the mayor's call with County Supervisor Cindy Chavez about testing, tracing, as the city manager reported out. So I guess they explained that they are reaching capacity to do the goal of 4,000 tests a day, but they are not getting the collection, the specimens. Part of that is that they have a lot of appointments and people don't get to the appointments. So we talked about, and we're now going to be meeting weekly, but just talking about communications and getting the information out, reinforcing, emphasizing the importance of, if you have an appointment, make sure you go there. We also are still exploring the possibility of a test site in North County. It's very much San Jose-centric right now, where the test sites are, so maybe if we spread it out, more people will make their appointments. So those are some of the conversations we're having, but we are meeting weekly, which has been really helpful. So, Councilman McAllister, did you have something else? I think I lost. Oh, no? No? Okay, no. All right. Anyone else? Staff? For anything else? If not, is there a closed session report from the attorney?
No closed session report tonight.
Great. Thank you very much. So then we stand adjourned at 8:58 p.m. And the next City Council meeting will be held on Tuesday, May 19th, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great evening, and please stay safe and healthy. Take care.